This happened about a month ago. My parents own a farm about a 45-minute drive away from where I live. I often go there to help work since I'm trying to save up for a car and whatnot, and since my grandmother recently hurt her back too. The week that I was out there working, I decided that it would be fun to have one of my friends too, who live close to my grandparents, just out for the night camping. So, 3 days prior, I called him and we set up a date to go onto my grandparents' property and just have some fun. But the night came and my friend arrived at the house and we packed up supplies such as food and water to put out the fire and whatnot, and a 2-man tent, sleeping bags, and just all your normal camping gear. When we got to our preferred camping site, it was already dark, so we lit a fire and got to work on setting up camp. But we had fun, mostly talking about how much school sucked, new music that we discovered, and which were the hottest celebrities, and eventually we decided to call it a night, seeing that it was 1:30 in the morning and had to leave that following day. So we settled in our tent and started to go to sleep. Well, at least we tried. I was laying in my sleeping bag just thinking when, all of a sudden, I started to hear footsteps outside our tent. Now, you guys could say that it could be my grandparents coming out to check on us, but we were out pretty far on the property from the house and had the only off-road vehicle that could make it out there. Plus, my grandparents went to sleep super early, so I doubt it was them. We don't have any large animals on that part of the farm either, and those footsteps, they were definitely heavy, almost like a person's. So I sat up and whispered to my friend that there was something outside the tent. He just whispered back, "There's no one there, stop it," but he still sat up and listened. My friend knows that I don't fuck with shit like this. I mean, I joke around a lot, but not with this kind of stuff, so we listened for a bit, but didn't hear it anymore, so we laid back down and tried to just shrug it off as a deer or something. I would love to say that it ended here, but as I was laying there, I hear them again, only this time much closer. And to be honest, I'm petrified. I felt just really vulnerable in a tent, and I can't move very well, and I can't even see what's out there. Plus, how's a thin layer of cloth going to protect me, right? The footsteps continue closer and closer to the tent until it's right outside the door. And now, I can hear it sniffing. Not like a dog's short and quick pace sniffs, though. They were long and hard sniffs, like it was trying to desperately catch a whiff of something delicious. It goes on for a few minutes, and then my friend shifts in his sleep and it stops. All is silent, and then I hear a voice, and I can't make out what it says, but I know it's not a voice that I've heard before. The voice was just whispering unintelligent words as it moved away from the tent, and I was really scared at this point. Eventually the sound goes away, and I don't remember dozing off, but the next thing I knew, I was awoken again by the sounds of the tent moving. I turned over to see if my friend was getting up to go pee or something, but he was sound asleep. My heart thumping in my chest at this point, I reached behind him and grabbed the machete that we kept there in the rear of the tent, and I slowly turned to face my side of the tent. Something was moving it, though. I sat up really slowly and began to move towards the zipper. Doing this, I accidentally hit my head on the hanging LED lantern, causing the tent to stop moving. I froze, and then the footsteps started again. Only this time, they were at an even pace heading towards our burnt-out fire. I grabbed the zipper and, trying to make as little noise as possible, I opened the flap. Outside, the moon was shining bright, and just at the corner of the fire pit, I could make out the silhouette of a human-like figure crouched and looking right at me. Apparently, my moving and unzipping had woken my friend up too, and he saw me looking outside. "Dude, what are you doing?" he asked. "Shh, I see something," I said. Then, out of nowhere, he yells at the top of his lungs, "Whoever is out there, we have a fucking gun. Get the fuck out of here." The thing takes off down the trail, but not running like a human. It was sort of doing a crouching gallop, like a Gollum from the Lord of the Rings, if you can picture that. I zip up the tent and lay down, clutching the machete to my chest, and when I woke up the next morning, I took a look around. There were footprints all around our tent, but they transformed halfway around from what looked like to be human to deer, like almost in mid-step. Now, I've heard of skinwalkers before, and I'm pretty sure that that's what this thing was. Sure, those prints could have just been a deer or something, but if it hadn't have been for my friend scaring it off, I'm not too sure if it would have left us alone, and that is really strange behavior for a deer. The thing that scares me the most, though, is that my grandfather is a skeptic, and he doesn't believe in anything like that. Yet, when I told him about what happened, he went pretty much white, and there was a look of dread across his face. This happened about 6 years ago. I was working at a tanning salon on the south side of Chicago, and on Mondays, the salon side was closed, so I was used to just being there and being the only employee working at the front desk to let tanners in. Now, it isn't the best neighborhood, but I was used to it by this point because I had worked there for a few years, and I knew that there were homeless people and prostitutes that walked the street. Also, in the alley behind the building, many homeless guys' bodies had been found there. So I'm a female, blonde, 5'2", and small stature, but had always been not the one to be afraid of confrontation. I'd been used to it at this point and never had a huge problem really, and I'm a daughter of a frontline Marine in the Vietnam War and knew to just never show fear. I had my fair share of bums coming in when the weather was bad too, and I would just stand up behind the counter and tell them to get out, or if you're not tanning, then you need to fucking leave. But for some reason, my tone usually made them immediately take off. There were a few homeless men too that I'd see in front of the building that I would let take out cigarette butts out of our cigarette disposal bin. I mean, hell, that was less work for me to do anyway, so why not? I wouldn't tell them to leave, though I was supposed to, unless a customer was coming in or out of the building. But there was one Monday, though, that I was the only employee and there were a few clients tanning. During this time, I was behind the desk and was just clicking through Facebook and stuff. A few minutes went by and I felt something that I'd never felt before. Just an overwhelming feeling of fear, and I actually started trembling. I didn't know what the fuck was going on, but then I looked up and at the desk in front of me, in front of what was the front doors, you're able to see clients come in and out. And holy fuck, there was a man almost taller than the door frame, face pressed against the door glass, just staring at me. But when we locked eyes, I noticed his eyes were kind of dead, if that's the right word. There was just no expression on him, and he was just staring at me. I grabbed the phone and stood up and walked around the desk where I had to literally lock the door as he was pressed against it. He then started banging on the door and jiggling the handle and all that, and I knew right then that he was not a customer and not someone that I wanted in here with me. So I walked to the other side of the spa and shut the door and called my sister because I knew something wasn't right. This man just wasn't right. As I'm on the other side, I hear the front door open and I'm now in tears, not knowing what's about to happen, and someone comes into the salon side that I was on and it was completely dark and I'm just trying to hide, and I see a male figure walking my way and I thought, oh shit, this is it, isn't it? But it was one of the male tanners that started asking if I was okay. I started crying at this point, which is really unlike me, and he said, it's okay, I'll call the police, and when I went to leave, he barged in saying, where is she? Where's that girl? Where's the girl that I saw at the desk? The male tanner, which was my saving grace that day, said to the guy that she's obviously busy and to get out of here, and then he ran off. I thanked the man and cried and hugged him, and even though he knew something wasn't right with this man, he made sure that I was okay. He stayed with me until the police came too, and I just told them that he was just pressed up against the glass and very sternly asking where I'd gone. I had called my boss after that, and she told me that she would check the surveillance cameras outside, and I worked the next day and asked to watch with her, and what I saw was just way worse than those dead eyes. The cameras had shown me sitting at the computer and all that, and him coming around the back of the building. He had looked at me through multiple windows, finally coming to the front door, timed for almost 5 minutes, and I hadn't noticed for 5 minutes. What happened next would terrify me for the rest of my life too, because as he was standing there, without me even knowing, his hand was, well, down his pants, if you catch my drift. I hadn't noticed when I looked up because the desk was waist height. We called the police again to show them the video too, and I was just in complete shock and horror. I mean, what would have happened had I not seen him and got the balls to get up and lock the door in front of him? Or what would have happened had there been a female tanner leaving or letting him in or something? What would have happened if the male tanner had just let the man in? All I know is that I know that male tanner probably saved my life that day. So 2 months later, I was working for St. Baldrick's Foundation, where I was shaving heads for children's cancer awareness, something I just do every year, and I have different clients. Some want to chat, some want to know where I work so that they can see me and get their hair cut again, and a middle-aged man came to my booth and started up a conversation. I told him where I worked, and he froze and asked, "Were you and are you the girl working when that man?" And we both knew what he was referring to, and I said yes, that was me. I still work there, and am I allowed to ask what happened? He started apologizing over and over again, and he was the police officer that had come to my work that day. And he told me that that man had just been released from prison that day. He was apparently arrested down the street fondling himself that day again, and was now behind bars yet again. He told me not to be afraid, but I still don't even know the guy's name, and if or when he's released again, I don't have anything to go off of that would protect me. And so, a few weeks later, I just left the job, and now they're actually currently out of business. The one thing that I'll never forget from that day was the man's dead eyes, and also the man that saved my life, and I guess he'll just never know my appreciation. When I was about 8, I lived in a small town in southwest England. It was just me and my mum home since my dad was away on a business trip. We had a basement which we rarely went down to since there was not much down there apart from a few old things that we just didn't need. And I had been noticing food was going missing and we couldn't figure out where it was going. I even searched the basement a few times, but when I was down there, I just felt like I was being watched, so I avoided going down there. One night though, I was laying in bed awake just trying to go to sleep when suddenly I heard my mum call my name from downstairs, although something just seemed off about her voice. I got out of bed and was about to walk downstairs when I was pulled aside. It was my mum, and she pulled me into her bedroom and closed the door silently. I tried asking her what was happening, but she just told me to be quiet. I heard my name being called every minute or so, and my mum called the cops and told them that there was a person downstairs trying to lure me down there. They told her to remain silent and hidden until the cops arrived, and we waited for about 5 minutes. All the while my name was being called until we heard fast footsteps coming up the stairs. The door opened and we were relieved to see the police in the doorway, and we moved soon after, and I was just told at the time that it was our old house and it was haunted, which I found out that it was a lie about 8 years later. When I was about 16, my mum told me the real story too. Apparently, a lady who I'll refer to as Jane escaped a psychiatric ward based near her house where she was placed after murdering her 2 children. She then walked to a random house, which happened to be ours, and just hid in the basement, stealing food whilst we were asleep. This terrified me since I had actually been down there, and that feeling of being watched was real. And while that was creepy, it wasn't as bad as the next part. Apparently, on the night the police came, she'd been holding a knife and calling my name, hoping that I would go down the stairs so that she could get me. And if it wasn't for my mum, I would have gone down there too. The only reason I know all this is because the police arrested her and got this out of her at the police station. She was sent back to the ward, and now I'm 25, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I just received a news alert saying that this lady, she apparently just broke out again. So please, if you live in the southwest, be alert and please just stay safe. So my sister and I, we were talking with my parents a couple of days ago about our childhood. While we were talking, I remembered that my mum used to tell my aunts about this creepy apartment that we used to live in. So I decided to ask her about it. Back then, we moved in and out of apartments because of my dad's job, and this story takes place in one of the first ones that we lived in. The apartment was really small. Coming in, you went right into the kitchen or living room, and on the right was the master bedroom. The four of us slept in that room, but on two different beds. My parents' bed was in front of the bathroom, and my sister and my bed was in front of the closet. This is important for later in the story. So, the first few weeks after moving in, things were normal, but after a while, my mum said that she started noticing strange things in the apartment. Nothing too out of the ordinary, just a couple of things went missing from time to time and appeared days later in completely different places from where they were when they got lost. This could easily be explained by us kids, as I was 5 and my sister was 3 when this happened. But after a couple of weeks of things going missing, my mum said that she had a nightmare where something called her name from inside the bathroom, so she decided to go and check, but when she opened the door to the bathroom, she woke up. She said that she was really freaked out too and couldn't go back to sleep. The next day, things were normal again, and my mum ended up forgetting about the dream until she went to sleep again. She ended up having the same dream, but this time, when she woke up, she realized that she couldn't move. Then, she noticed that the bathroom door started to open and she saw a thing crawling from the door to her bed. As it got closer, she kept trying to wake up my dad, but she just wasn't able to move. She told us that she could feel it crawling up the bed too and getting on top of her. She said it looked like a malformed fetus or something. When it was on her chest, it started grabbing at her face and hugging her. She had no idea how to get it off of her, so she decided to start praying in her mind and telling this thing to leave, and after a while of doing this, the thing started to crawl down the bed and into the bathroom again until it was just completely gone. As soon as it was gone, my mum was able to move and she started crying and woke my dad up. And obviously, he just brushed her off and told her that it was just a bad dream. The next day, my mum didn't want to go into the room or the bathroom, and when night came, she was just terrified of going to sleep again. But when she did eventually fall asleep, she ended up having the exact same dream again too. And this ended up becoming a regular occurrence for my mum for the next couple of months, but after a while, she says that the fetus thing actually started talking to her. It started calling her mum and crying like a baby when it was on her chest. It got so bad that my mum didn't want to sleep anymore, and there were actually a couple of times that she would go days without sleep. She ended up getting really pale and depressed too, and my dad started to take her a little more seriously at this point. But my mum has been a Catholic her whole life, so my dad decided to buy her a small cross that she could put under her pillow, thinking that it would stop this thing, but of course it didn't. If anything, it actually made things worse. Pretty soon, my little sister started having bad dreams too. She doesn't remember them now because she was 3, but my mum says that my sister would tell her that baby scared her at night, and she didn't want to sleep anymore either. And that's when my dad finally took my mum seriously and took her to see a priest. The priest told her that somebody may have had an abortion in that bathroom, and he gave them holy water and told them to throw it around the apartment. They did, but it also didn't work. After a few more days of bad dreams, my dad saw no other option but to just move apartments, so we did, and just like that, my mum and sister's bad dreams just stopped. Is that a coincidence? I don't know, but my mum still doesn't like to talk about it. She gets really creeped out whenever somebody brings it up. And so, to be honest, I believe her. This happened to me a few years ago on Halloween. It was the first time my mum had finally agreed to let me and my siblings hand out candy to children in our neighbourhood. So, like teenagers usually do, we dressed up and excitedly awaited to hand out candy. The night went easily enough, and the kids in our neighbourhood were excited to have another house to visit, and we were happy to see the pure smiles on their faces when they told us about their costumes. As the night began to end, we split the leftover candy between us, and we sat on the couch trading Kit Kats for Reese's and stupid stuff like that when there was an urgent fast knock at the door. My mum looked at us with a mixture of concern and confusion and told us to go upstairs. The only reason we had found this odd is because we had already turned our front porch light off and we weren't expecting anyone else this night. The rest of this story I pieced from my mum, since I was upstairs and kind of unaware of the situation for most of the night. So apparently, a man, a scruffy, rough-looking guy, was standing on our porch when my mum opened the door. He immediately said in a rushed voice, "Can I come inside?" My mum, feeling like this wasn't a man that she would have even opened the door for, immediately stuttered a no as she tried to shut the door. The man stuck out his hand to the door, and my mum is short and small-framed with pretty much no strength, so the man could have easily ripped the door open and made his way inside. But luckily for us, my dad was downstairs just as this was happening, and my dad is tall and muscular and a former Marine, and as soon as he heard my mum struggling to shut the door on this guy, he rushed over and told the guy to fuck off and pulled my mum away and slammed the door shut and deadbolted it. My dad told us to turn the lights off right after that and to hide in our rooms because apparently the guy had started circling our house, and on top of that, 3 cop cars came screeching down the road just as my dad locked the door. My 3 siblings and I just waited in our pitch-dark rooms for what felt like forever, afraid that this guy would see us through the bedroom window or something, which wasn't covered with anything at the time. After the guy had been detained and found, the cops knocked on our door, and here is apparently what happened. The guy had been running from the cops that night and found the first house on the street to try and escape getting caught. Not only that though, but the cops, they found a gun hidden in our bushes in the backyard. The guy had hid his gun because he knew that he was going to be arrested and didn't want to get into even more trouble for being armed. And so, I don't know what would have happened to my mum or any of us if my dad hadn't come down the stairs that night. The thought that that man had a gun on him while trying to force his way into our house, it really scares me to this day. In fact, I make sure to never answer doors unless I know who's there now. So I was browsing Reddit the other day and I found a story about Lower Valley Pike. I knew when the author gave the location that it sounded familiar, so I Google mapped it and I'd actually been around there at some point. And turns out that around that area is home to a good deal of weird stuff. None of this happened to me, but to my wife, and these are her experiences that she shared directly with me. So my wife went to college in the area of the Link Post and has her own unsettling stories about those years. In the Link Post, the author mentions all of the cars on the streets with all the doors wide open, and that beats anything that she's ever told me as far as creep level, but when I relayed that story to her, she wasn't surprised at all and said that the whole place always just made her feel uncomfortable. So her school was shy of 15 to 20 minutes from the road mentioned in the Link Post, Lower Valley Pike. The school was an extremely strict and a total dry campus, Cigarettes and alcohol would get you expelled on the first offense. The RDs and the RAs were sent out to the typical places people would try and hide in order to bust people too. For this reason, she and her friends would go a good distance away to do their partying and whatnot. The area is and was pretty remote, and there's a good deal of a scenic wooded area, so at 10 or 20 minutes into, that felt further away than it was, but the distance was worth it because, nobody wants to be expelled over a pack of Virginia Slims, if you get my drift. Well, obviously I have no explanation for the link post. The things that she told me are more along the lines of humans being the real monsters, such as animal sacrifices, finding makeshift altars with children's things on them and someone's blood, explicit things done to baby dolls, and things hanged from trees that obviously just didn't belong there. She says that Clifton, Ohio and the surrounding area was always just eerie at night, and said that in the late fall, things just got downright unsettling. Once, on one of these trips into BFE for some Boone's farm, she walked away from a group of friends to pee and found a large garbage bag full of domestic-type animals, dogs and cats that had no signs of injuries other than they had their throats cut and blood drained almost completely. My wife has hunted and is familiar with the idea that big game needs to have the blood drained so it doesn't spoil the meat, but said that nobody was going to eat these animals, and she also informed me that that practice is unnecessary. Needless to say, this was enough to freak out a typical group of college girls. Another time, she came across a large plastic rubber-style baby doll that, again, had its throat slit, was naked, and had a hole cut in its genital region and stuffed with things. She said in a number of times in her 4 years in that area that they came across a decent-sized fire set just in the middle of the road randomly. She said that there'd be no reason for them to be there either. No house nearby, just a wood fire on asphalt. One year, she volunteered to help clean for people in the area as a part of a large service project. She and a friend went to one house, and she says that she experienced a complete feeling of just utter dread the whole time that she was there with no explanation. Just that pit of your stomach feeling, like something is bad, and every part of her body was just screaming to get away from there. She didn't see anything or have any odd occurrences while there, just that the whole place felt bad and the woman of the house was really weird. And when I asked her to elaborate on weird, she couldn't. My wife says that she always assumed that it was some kind of Satanist stuff the whole time, and a few of her friends actively went out looking for creepy things after they came across them, the first few times anyway, but she said that she never did because everything she saw made her feel sick and she didn't want to find more. I didn't know my wife when she was in college, and so I've asked her to take me and show me around, tell me stories, take me to local places, and she has, once. She showed me her dorm and all that type of stuff, and on the way, there out in the middle of nowhere, was a random house with things hanged in a tree that were not decorations. The kids' toys, maybe? I'm not too sure, but I told her to pull over and asked if she saw it, and she just kept going and said, "Don't look at it, just ignore it. We don't want to know." We only live an hour or so away, but she doesn't really like to go back and spend any time on or around campus. She doesn't like to talk about this stuff, and based on that reaction, I can tell that she was really shaken by it all. So last week, I spent 5 days with my ex. I had lived with him and his mum for over a year and also worked with her. But we were fairly close, and she passed unexpectedly in her bedroom a week or so after I had left him and moved out. The first things I experienced were just things going missing. Some of this can be explained, but some I just can't. For example, my phone went missing when no one else was in the house but us. We didn't leave the house that night, and we just never found my phone. It was completely gone. Another thing that I, him, and his sister all witnessed were a pack of cigarettes just disappearing and then reappearing on his bed several minutes later after we all searched there several times. Shit like this happened almost every day that I was there, and honestly, I thought I was going crazy at one point. Next was the change in the vibes of the place. I had never felt scared in that house before, but anytime I was left alone last week, I was terrified and paranoid as hell that something was about to go down. That feeling never left the entire time I was there too, and Friday morning, the house ended up getting raided. I won't go into that, but that feeling that shit was about to go down just constantly didn't fade. I don't know if the feeling was a warning or what, no idea. But my main experience, though, was really odd, and it scared me to death. So, I'd been in his bedroom just cleaning, and my ex was upstairs in the bathroom for a while. He's very loud, and he had not come downstairs for a long time. And I know this for a fact. One of his friends was out in his garage, and I also know for a fact that he wasn't in the house when this occurred. So, the bedroom door is kind of set into the wall, sort of really shittily, and between the wall and the door is a fairly large crack that you can see into the living room through. Lights were on in both rooms when this occurred. I was just cleaning, and I suddenly felt like someone was standing outside the bedroom door. The feeling was almost unbearable, as I just knew that no one was out there. I ignore it though and just put it down to being skittish, and a few minutes later, I happen to look at the door and I can see through the crack very clearly, and I see someone sitting on the floor in the living room, just angled left, half facing the door almost. I can see their face really clearly, so I know that they're wearing glasses too. The person looked similar to my ex, but off somehow. But they were looking down as if they were looking at a phone, and I take a step back and open the door, and there's no one fucking out there. I immediately walk upstairs to my ex and ask if he'd been downstairs recently, and he said no, and I told him what happened. Later, my ex's friend came inside, and I told him what had happened. He told me that when he slept on the couch when he was crashing that there were a few times that he woke up to go pee or go to the kitchen and whatnot, and swore that he saw my ex's mum just standing in the dark upstairs or in the kitchen. And to be honest, I just can't see her doing that. I don't know if what he saw was really her, but it terrifies me nonetheless. Also, a few days later, I told my ex's sister what happened, and she said that one day she heard her mum's voice yelling, asking her a question, but she couldn't make out what she said. I just have massive goosebumps and tears telling this story. I've had several experiences throughout my life, and had recently been thinking that it had been a while since I experienced something like this. But this definitely topped them all. So I heard about this encounter a while back where a guy was having something watch his house at night from the woods. At the time, I was pretty convinced that it was probably just an animal of some kind that he was just overreacting to, but I've experienced something similar myself, and I'm not so convinced now that it's an animal. So this weekend, I was doing some yard work. Just mowing, hopefully for the last time this year, trimming bushes and trees, etc. It ended up being dark by the time that I was finished, and I still needed to take all the trimmings to the pile in the backyard near the woods. I wasn't really concerned, and there was enough light from the house that I could get the job done. I had my headphones on and merely went about my business. At some point, though, I just got this eerie feeling. I guess you could call it the cliche being watched feeling. Obviously, as an adult male, I ignored it and continued to do what I needed to get done. After a few more trips as I got near the brush pile again, I felt this low grumbling sound that I couldn't actually hear since I had music playing. I took my headphones off and started looking around to see what it was coming from, and that's when I noticed a pair of reflective eyes just inside the tree line in the shadows, which is pretty startling to look up and see, even if you're used to being around wildlife. But to be honest, I actually jumped a little bit, then calmed down thinking that it must just be a deer or something. but at this point, that low grumbling sound was very clearly a growl. I realized whatever this was probably a predator, so I cautiously dropped what I was carrying and backed my way to the house. The eyes, they didn't move, but just stared me down the whole way. I decided to just finish cleaning up the next morning and went inside and locked up after that. I was a little shaken, but only from thinking about how close I had been to a large predator, still thinking that it was probably a bear or something. I had dinner, cleaned up, and went about relaxing after a long afternoon and evening of working outside. About 2 hours later, I happened to glance outside only to see those eyes still in the same spot, still staring at my house. The story that I had heard that I mentioned earlier, it started running through my mind, and I actually got a little bit nervous at this point. I decided, rather than hiding in my house, I was going to go and see what it was. I grabbed a flashlight and my 9mm and headed outside again. I kept the flashlight directly on the eyes as I walked across the yard, and they stared back without blinking, which was really unnerving. But what was worse was that the thing in the woods just never got clearer. It stayed a shadowy silhouette among the trees with 2 brightly reflecting red eyes. Even when I was close enough to see details on the trees all around it, all I could see of the thing itself was a darkness in its eyes. It was at this point that I took in the size of whatever was out there, and the eyes were level with my own, and I stand at 6 feet. But just before the tree line, the ground slopes downhill pretty steeply, which means that where this thing was standing, the ground is about 2 feet lower than where I was standing, and that made this thing at least 8 feet tall. The growling was back and louder than ever at this point, and I decided, gun or not, that this was close enough and headed back inside again. But just like the original story, I was shaken and didn't sleep until the sun was up that morning. The eyes were there all night, and they've been there a few times ever since that night too, and I'm pretty concerned. I never saw any updates on that original story, and I didn't take the time to look for it, but I was also wondering if the OP of that story or anyone else ever figured out what it could be. The similarities between his encounter and mine are actually pretty striking, and I'd really like to know what I'm dealing with here. Did that guy ever post anything else about what he found or did about it? Any other ideas on what I should do? I'm definitely not going to be confronting it again, armed or not, so please, don't suggest that. During the time that my parents were divorced and I was 15, my siblings and I would have to go and visit my father every other weekend. This would go on until I decided not to go, due to some personal matters that I don't want to get into. But my father moved into this house that had been built in the 80s, I believe. But don't quote me though on this, because it's been a very long time since I've been to this house. My siblings and I had a feeling right away that there was just something not right about the place. Our father and stepmother are the type that don't believe in anything, and if you told them that weird things were going on, they would just call you crazy, and they would say that we just didn't want to stay with them. So, the first weird thing that happened in this house was late one night. Our rooms were in the older part of the house. A hallway connected all 3 rooms side by side to each other. Also, there was a bathroom located in front of my brother's bedroom. My room was the old master bedroom, and it had a small or tiny bathroom, and my father put a TV up in the corner, not really for me, but more for whoever slept in that room. So, I had fallen asleep to a TV show, and suddenly my sister, aged 7, came running to my room and crawled into bed with me scared. I asked her what was wrong, and she stated that there was a man staring at her in a doorway. My sister wasn't one to lie, and the way that she acted was truly terrified, so I got up and headed to my door and looked down the hallway. I could clearly see her doorway from my bedroom door, and there was nothing there. I went back to my sister and told her that nothing was there and that she was fine and that she can sleep with me until she felt better. She agreed and went to sleep, and not more than an hour later, my brother, who was 5, came running to me and jumped into the end of the bed, waking me up, our sister staying asleep. I asked him what was wrong, and he too had a terrified look and said that there was a black figure standing in his doorway just looking at him. I sighed and got up again and checked the hallway and saw nothing, as I too could see his bathroom door from where I was. I went back to him and told him too the same as I told my sister, and he agreed and went back to sleep. I didn't see the shadow at this time, and it seemed to just never bother me, at least at this point, but that didn't make me believe them any less, and I truly believed that they saw something. But these sightings would go on like this for a while too, and my siblings would be scared and crawl into my bed and then sleep there until morning. So, to keep my sister and my brother in their room, nightlights were put in their rooms to help them sleep. This helped to a point, but it didn't stop the weirdness at all. My sister would complain too that she would watch the ceiling fan in her room and it would spin backwards on its own when it wasn't even turned on. This fan had an option to go backwards, but you had to climb up on a ladder and switch it that way, and it wasn't automatic and it wasn't set that way anyway, and it would always go forward. You had to pull on its chain very hard to turn it on and change the speeds too. I tried to debunk this one day too when I played with her fan, and I found it weird that it would do this on its own. It was just pretty much unexplainable. I just couldn't debunk it, and at this point, I still hadn't encountered this shadow that my siblings had kept stating that they were seeing. That is, until this one night, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Once again, I'm in bed just watching TV, and suddenly my TV just shuts off on its own. I arched a brow a little at this, as the remote was clearly in my hand, and I hadn't rolled on it to turn off the TV or press the button to turn it off or anything. I then thought, well, it's an older TV, and maybe it's just going bad or something, so I turned the TV back on. A few seconds later, my TV goes off again, and then I sit up at this, and I point and stare at this TV and quickly turn it back on and watch. Seconds later, it goes off again. Now, I should have been spooked right here, but I was thinking that the TV had just gone bad or something, so out of frustration, I say without thinking, under my breath, as I push the button again to turn the TV back on, stop it. And click, the TV goes on and it just stops turning itself off. I was satisfied, and so I laid my head back down onto my pillow. I know that I really should have put 2 and 2 together, but I didn't, because a second later, my brother comes running to me saying that he can't sleep and was scared, so he crawls into the bed next to me and we just watch some TV. We were watching TV, and then the room just suddenly got really cold. There's a window at the end of my bed, so I look up to see if maybe I forgot to close it, but no, it's closed and the blinds are down. My brother and I ignored it while we pulled the extra blanket over us and just kept watching TV. Then, my brother whispers to me, "See him?" I arched my brow a bit, confused, as I whispered back, looking down at my brother, "See who?" He gestures with his hand, still holding the covers toward his chest, and I look over toward my door and I finally see what he sees. There's this large black shadow of what appears to be a male just staring at us. But there was no face or anything, just a very tall male in shape figure. I blinked twice to make sure that I was seeing what I was seeing, and it was as if this thing knew what I was doing, and as to say, "No, I'm here." The blinds above our head began to bang hard against the window as if a big gust of wind was just hitting them. I'll repeat again that the window was closed. There was no other way that this could be happening too, unless I was physically grabbing these blinds and slamming them hard against the window myself, which obviously I wasn't. I could tell that my brother was terrified and had pushed himself closer to me, and I'm a mix of emotions of fear, worry, protection. There's no way will I let this thing get anywhere near my brother, and so I pull my brother close to me and glare now at this shadow. I don't know if I said this out loud or in my mind, but I know I was thinking, enough. I know it sounds kind of comical, but believe me, to be able to be thinking that while you're staring at this obviously intimidating thing wasn't easy. I guess it hurt me as suddenly the blinds just stopped moving and the shadow just disappeared right in front of us. I told my brother that we were safe and he could sleep in my room until morning. While we slept, I got up and went to check my sister, as now I was really concerned for her, and to my relief, she was fine and fast asleep. That night, I slept on the floor in front of my door so that I could wash my sister's door and my brother, who was in my bed, the rest of the night. It wasn't comfortable at all, but I did it, and the shadow just didn't reappear that night, thank goodness. To this day, that shadow is still there, but the last time I went back to my father's home was when I was 19, and I've just never been back. I'm now 35, and my sister and brother are much older, and they tell me of stories after I left, that the shadow is still there, and our father and stepmother still believe it's just the old house playing tricks on them. I don't know what that thing is, or how it got there, or if it's a ghost or a shadow person or what, but I know what I saw, and it was creepy. I live in the UK, and here, carp fishing is the most popular form of freshwater fishing, and I love it. I was fishing on a private lake in the middle of a dense old woodland, the sort of trees that you would imagine in a haunted woods in a fantasy film or something. The lake itself was an old estate lake that used to be a rich person's land. However, only a small part of the original manor remained. As otters are prevalent in the area, it's fenced off with electric fences, and to gain access, you must know the padlock code at the entrance. It was about 11 PM, and I was sitting in my bivvy, similar to a tent, and the last of the day's light had all gone out at this point. I was making a coffee, and I could hear twigs breaking and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I thought that it might be the only other guy fishing the lake coming over to ask me to take a photo of a fish that he caught, but once I looked out there was nothing there. The almost full moon illuminated the area, yet there was no sign of anything bar a few birds frantically calling to each other. I was a little confused because I was certain that I heard footsteps, but this is a common occurrence when fishing at night, and every fisherman will tell you of the time that he was certain there was somebody walking behind them, yet when they checked, nobody was there. So I just reasoned that it was my mind playing tricks on me. However, as the night wore on, I just kept hearing the footsteps. Every time they seemed to be louder than the last two. Now, I'm not a small guy and I'm not easily spooked, so I was just getting annoyed at it at this point. I turned my head torch on and shone it around asking who was there. The head torch shone through the trees, illuminating the trees in a tunnel vision fashion. Yet, nobody was there. And it was then that I started to feel uneasy. Half an hour had went on and I drifted back to sleep. That is, until the footsteps were back, but this time they were closer and much clearer. I had a mallet in one hand and a knife in the other and shone my head torch around the area, and to my horror, there was a middle-aged woman just standing there. It made me jump out of my skin, but as I'm not one to particularly believe in the paranormal, I thought that she'd somehow just wandered on, got past the fence and was lost or something. I asked if she was okay, and she started to talk about how her husband that passed away just loved to go fishing, yet whenever he asked her to come, that she would turn him down as she hated the outdoors. And so now she likes to go on walks around lakes and rivers. But bear in mind, the nearest village is 5 miles away through a forest, or 10 miles if you were to walk along the paths, and it was around 3 AM at this point. Because apparently it makes her feel close to him. I tried to give her some advice, and she laughed, saying that men always try to think of something smart to say when we don't know what to say. She said goodbye and then just left. The next morning, I walked over to where the other guy was fishing and told him the story and asked if he'd seen her or how'd she even gotten into the land in the first place. He said that he hadn't seen her, but apparently he heard the sound of a woman crying at different parts of the night, but was too scared to go and check it out. He was as confused as I was, and when the bailiff came around, I told him the story, and he said that he wouldn't know how it could happen, as there's a motion sensor that trips as you walk through the gate, in case of poachers and all that, and that's on all night. He actually didn't believe me too until he came around to talk to the other guy, and he put his side of the story to him. He was as confused as we were, and to this day, nobody knows who that woman was or how she ever came to be on the land. I'd like to preface this story by saying that it's not my encounter, but my great aunt's encounter. She told this story to me a few years back after many years of pestering her about it. I had grown up knowing vague details of this story, but never the full thing. I did record the entire conversation that we had, in fact, amongst my great aunt and a few other members of my family and myself. To this day, I still have the recording on my phone, and I'll find a way to post it there, so if you've got that interest, you can find it. But for now, here's the exact conversation that we had, with some slight changes to names for privacy. When Devin and I were younger, and before we got married, and even afterwards, we had a Ouija board at our house, and we think that this might have been the cause of everything that came after. Anyways, we used to play the Ouija board all the time, and one night when we got married, we moved into his mobile home down the road, but further down from where we are now. Michael was born, but he was only about a year or so old, and Billy Joe was a baby. So, Trisha, his aunt's sister, had a boyfriend named Brian. One day, I came home from work. On the very first day, I had this brand new job at MSI, and the babysitter had told me that Brian had been there that day and that he really wanted to see me, and that it was important. I tried to call, but there was no answer. I tried and tried, but there was still no answer, so I thought that if it really was that important, that he'll just come back. And well, he actually ended himself. He went home that day, and that was it. So, of course, my question was, what did he want me for? Why did he want to see me? Well, about a year later, we got the Ouija board out. We were having a party, and we were just young and stupid. We were only about 18 or 19 years old at the time, and so I asked the Ouija board, with two other people doing it, what did Brian want to see me about that day. He came back and said that his name was Link, which was Brian's nickname, L-Y-N-K. It was Jesse and Gary that were working at it, and I said, what did he want to see me about? And the board said that he wanted to tell me that he had caught David and Trisha kissing each other at the shack. David and I were already married, so there were denials and whatever, but it turns out that it was actually true. That's exactly what happened. He had caught them kissing each other, and that's why I broke up with Trisha. So that's all he wanted to see me about, apparently. Within a couple of weeks, Michael started seeing an imaginary friend too. And when Michael got old enough to talk, he would say stuff like, can I go out and play? Bardo was out there waiting for me. He started throwing his toys out the front room window and off the trailer, and we'd get up and they'd just be all gone. Everything in the room would be just gone out the window, and we'd ask, why'd you do that? And he'd say, well, Bardo made him do it. And to be honest, we didn't know what to do because we just thought that Bardo was an imaginary friend. So, then Billy, he gets old enough to talk, and he's really scared of everything at this point. He's scared of his own shadow, in fact, and he clung to me for most of his life, and he slept on my chest until he was about 10. Now, one night, he kept saying that he was seeing this person in his closet, and it was a mobile home, right? So the closet is tiny, and so was the bedroom. David and I were laying in bed. It was a summer night, and Billy Joe said, "Mum, he's bothering me." I said, "Just go to sleep, honey, it's okay." And then we heard talking through the walls. You know, like chattering with someone, but not loud enough to hear the words. Like a child's voice heard softly through really thin walls. And then we heard a response. A deep voice, low and guttural, answering back. Terrified and in disbelief, I said, "Billy, run to Mummy, baby." So he did, and he came running, and then I had to go and get Michael because he was in the next room down. I was terrified, and so was David. David was so terrified that he wouldn't even get out of bed to go to get Michael. But David kept Billy Joe with him, and I had to go and get Michael, and we actually didn't move the next day. And it was then that we started saying, "Okay, what did you see? Who is it?" and all that sort of stuff. And we come to find out that they, both the boys, started explaining things. Apparently, he was a little man and his name was Bardo. He wore a banner across his chest and it said Barno on it, though at the time we didn't know it said anything, just that they described this ribbon going across his chest with letters on it. He was also always in the backyard trying to get them both to come out. So then we moved, and about 3 years later, they started putting videos on TV, and it was a Thursday night show. Michael Jackson was the first video that we had ever seen, and his 1983 Thriller, I think it was. In one of those videos, we were sitting there watching, and one of the subliminal messages that he was putting in his video, he was trying to make fun of The Exorcist or something, was this little man. He was about 3 feet tall, a little gremlin, and there was a banner across his chest that said Bardo on it. We thought, holy crap, that's him. David came home and we just kept watching because we didn't have a VCR. There was no such thing as a VCR back then, so there was just no way to see it unless we just kept waiting for them to put the video on again. David saw it and we talked about it and just chalked it up to a coincidence so as not to scare the boys. Now, when David was little, he used to see someone he called the Spring Man too. He was absolutely terrified of him and had experience with this Spring Man as a child that were similar to the experiences the boys did with Bardo only a couple of years before. So, we were watching a Stephen King movie one night and it was about a man that was scared to death to get on a plane. Well, this plane started doing the whole shaky thing, turbulence. It was storming out and the guy looks out the window and there was Bardo on the wing of the plane, only without the banner this time. At this point, my aunt gets into discussions about this show and they realize it was not a Stephen King movie but in fact the Twilight Zone. It's the scene with the gremlin on the wing of the plane. You can look it up on Google to see pictures. And it was at this point that David pipes up and says, "That's the Spring Man." So, not only had David seen him as a child, but so had the boys. That was all I could get out of her on the subject, which was more than enough for me, I must say. I looked up the picture of the gremlin from the scene in the Twilight Zone, and it brought my aunt to tears almost. They're still very much afraid of these experiences. There were many more apparently, but were not mentioned in this story. Even Billy, 40 years old today, refuses to acknowledge or talk about any of these experiences. Anyway, I'll try and find out more about these experiences, and thanks for listening, guys. Whenever I get into conversations with friends in college about paranormal things, I always want to tell them this story, but it just it creeps me out so thoroughly that I hesitate. So, this involves my friend, Billy, and his brother, Danny. Billy and Danny are both over 6 feet tall and pretty stocky dudes. Danny is a year older though and much bigger, and they've had pretty rough lives. Their mother actually ended her life when they were younger, and father passed away a few months ago after they made a reconnection years and years later. So, I feel like they've had a connection to seeing and experience strange things for some reason. And that's why I partially found this encounter to be so frightening. So one night at about 1 a.m, my friend Billy heard frantic banging on his door. He looked through the peephole to see Danny banging on the door and begging Billy open the fucking door over and over again. Billy opens the door and Danny stumbles in covered in sweat in absolute terror. But Billy's in shock and completely confused, so he closes the door and comforts Danny, asking what the hell happened. Danny then goes on to describe what happened just before he opened the door. So apparently, Danny pulls into the driveway of their house, turns off his lights, gets out and locks his car door, and as he's walking towards the front door, he sees his own shadow against the garage door, and it kind of startles him. As he begins to calm back down, he looks back up at his shadow and notices that something just is off. He can't see the trail of his shadow from his feet to the garage door. He just sees his shadow perfectly outlined in the garage door as though it was painted there. He then realizes that the only light source on that part of the street is to his right, meaning that his shadow should be to the left, not directly in front of him. Danny stares at this shadow, seeing that it has the very obvious outline of a person, and so well outlined as if an industrial light was shining behind him, making their shadow a perfect and very apparent black shadow. Suddenly, the shadow ducks low and moves quickly across the garage door and disappears from view without a single sound being made. Danny obviously flips the fuck out and runs to his front door and starts knocking ferociously to alert Billy. As he's doing this, he notices something on the lawn to his left. He notices the same shadow, the same size, just standing there. Only this shadow was not painted across a tree or a garage door, but literally just standing on its own in the yard. No breathing, no movement of any kind, just standing and watching. Then, slowly, it begins to crouch slightly and back up into the mess of trees and bushes lining the next house over. Needless to say, I haven't been back to their place ever since then. So right around July, I found a sweet deal on a place. Looked very nice and spacious, really cheap, and also provides awesome internet. It'd be great for my first place to live. But ever since I moved in though, I've been wondering if maybe I was wrong. When I first moved in, things already started going weird. I didn't unpack for the first 2 days since I moved in my first day, but had a concert that night along with work, so I moved all of my stuff in, but everything stayed packed up except for necessities. Immediately upon coming home the next morning, I noticed something strange going on. I had set my box of kitchenware in the kitchen when I moved in so that it would be easy to unpack, but when I came home from work, I saw pans sitting on the stove. I knew that this was strange as I went out to eat after the concert the previous night. I played it off as me just taking some time out when I first got in the place and just forgot about the action. But the following nights, other mildly creepy things happened. Despite being alone, I would hear noises of other people moving around in my place. At first, I ignored it since I'm used to living in apartments which are connected to other places and we hear movement in other apartments quite frequently. However, I remember this new place isn't connected to anyone else's home and I really shouldn't be hearing movement like this. On another night, I had washed my pans and laid them flat on my counter to dry with rags underneath and all that, and I woke up to a loud noise and found my pans just all over the place. One in the sink, 2 on the floor, and the last on a completely separate counter. At this point, I was officially freaked out now. I mean, these kinds of things have been going on now for a little while. Nothing dangerous and mildly rare occurrences, but they do happen. Tonight, though, was the first time that I'd seen it with my own eyes. So, I was sitting at home just watching videos, and I started hearing people talk, almost right in my ear, in fact. I guess that maybe someone was outside just talking, but there was no one around my place. So, I started freaking out a bit, and I got up to get a can of pop as sugar comforts me, and as I finished my drink and set it down, it just suddenly flies across the room. I freeze, and then multiple things in my living room just began to be thrown around, and even a candle, which had thankfully not been lit, mind you. I ran out of my house as my anxiety makes me a giant coward, and when I finally mustered up the strength to go back in and get a video of it, the action just died down. I have a theory, though, as to what's going on here. I live in a pretty a ghetto area with nice places kind of scattered around a bit, so as not to make the place look totally run down, if you catch my drift. I've lived in this general area for about 10 years, I'd say, only moving a block away from my old apartment. This area sees just all kinds of crime. I know 2 people who have been killed right outside of my given area, in fact. An apartment building just next door to me had recently been burned down too, and I don't know what the death toll is from there, but maybe that was also part of this activity. I don't know a lot about the paranormal, but these are just guesses. There are way more incidences than this too, but this is already getting long, so I'll try and end it here. I'd like to know, though, what your thoughts are. Am I in danger? Do you have any advice? I can try to get footage, but it's hard as I don't own a camera to tape with while I'm gone. But if you guys have any thoughts to share, please do. This happened almost 10 years ago now. I was a 12-year-old girl, a typical tomboy. My friends were mostly guys, a couple of years older. I was pretty confident in myself too, and wasn't one to steer out of trouble if I was with my friends. One day in the middle of June, I was walking home from my stop. It was like a 5 or 10 minute walk, but nothing too far for a kid my age. I remember the sun was setting, so it was starting to get dark, but wasn't too dark yet. Since it was June, most people were off the streets too, either on holiday or just at home, so I was walking home alone at this point. The street itself wasn't very well lit, but in my mind, it was okay since A, it was the shortest route home, B, it wasn't really dark outside, and C, one of my friends gave me a butterfly knife. A really cheap knife, but I was feeling badass and well prepared. I was walking, totally spaced out, when suddenly I felt someone grab me. For a second, I thought it was a friend who happened to just walk by and scare me, but I remember feeling something was off at that point. The hands that were holding me were not those of a 14 or 15-year-old boy, but more manly, and one of them was trying to reach into my t-shirt. And then I felt a chill when I heard the man speak. He said in my native tongue, "Behave, you little whore." I remember that he somewhat slurred the words too. Not that he was drunk, but as if he was on drugs or just plain crazy, and that his breath just stank of real bad milk. I started struggling, desperately trying to get free from his arms, and I don't think that I've ever been more terrified. I managed to reach with one of my hands to my cargo shorts that had many pockets and deep ones at that, but managed to grab a knife at this point. He tried to tug at my hand and I almost dropped my weapon, and in that split second, I was convinced that I was about to end up dead. I managed to grab it though, and didn't even open it all the way and stabbed the man in his thigh. I doubt I made any actual damage to him, but it definitely startled him enough so that he loosened his grip. I managed to wriggle free and started running for my dear life straight home. He was swearing at me and I could hear his footsteps behind me at one point. I felt the need to turn around, but I didn't give in because I was frightened that if I did turn around, I'd see how close he actually was and maybe trip over or something. Not to mention that he probably had my knife at this point. I managed to turn to the door to my home and I pretty much crashed into it. But luck was definitely on my side because I managed to unlock the door to the apartment building pretty quickly and I just ran upstairs. To this day, almost 10 years ago, I have this reoccurring nightmare. I notice someone looking at me and I feel in my gut that he has bad intentions, so I run and he runs after me. It's always the same route as the actual event too, and it's always the same footsteps, and I always almost smash my face in the front door and just desperately try to find my key to open it. Anyway, I was pretty lucky to get away that day. I know that much. This happened a couple of years ago, but I feel like I'm ready to talk about it. So, in 2016, I had just turned 18 and was in my second semester of community college. I was lucky to get to take a few specialized classes that were requirements for my major too. These classes required me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. That's relevant because I was going to a town that I didn't know much about, and I didn't know anyone who lived there too. But there was a man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s. I'm 5'0", and at the time was about 130 pounds, which is just to say that I was pretty small and defenseless. We spent a lot of time in the lab for these classes too, and he was stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at the time and wanted to be nice, so I talked with him and my other classmates quite a bit, and was a lot friendlier to him than I would have been nowadays. He started being over-friendly to me and would just stand too close and ask too many personal questions, if you catch my drift. He'd flirt with me in class too, to the point that it seemed to make other people uncomfortable to watch. He also started staring at me a lot, with an intense look that honestly just scared me. Of course, me being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to just ignore it as best as I could, and I told my boyfriend about it, but again, Eddie hadn't actually done anything to me, so there wasn't a whole lot that I felt like I could do. So a few weeks after that started, all of us were hanging out in a small break room type area, studying for an exam in our next class, which was about 30 minutes away. I was sitting at one table just chatting with some middle-aged women in my class, and Eddie was at the next table over just messing with his phone. I announced that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up, and as I did, he tried, and failed, to discreetly turn his phone toward me and snap pictures of me as I walked to the machine. Mind you, I was getting my drink and was bent over at the time to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back to my seat, with him still taking photos, and I shot him a look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at me. I was trying to look pissed, but honestly, I was just really freaked out. I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend near in tears, telling him what happened. He was angry and said that I need to tell someone, but I said no, I didn't want to make a scene. He tried to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our last class finished at about 9 PM, and since it was January, it was completely dark out when we walked to our cars. I was actually texting one of my guy friends about what had happened when Eddie walked up to my car, stopped for a second, and looked at me through my windshield, then slowly just kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me, and the wind chill was below zero at this point, so he had to have made a point to walk to my car like that. I was terrified, and with my hand shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could, calling my boyfriend on the way and crying. After that, I decided I needed to talk to my professor about what was going on. I was so nervous, but I asked her for the next week if I could just talk to her privately when class was over. We went to her office and I told her about Eddie and what he'd done and how he acted weird toward me. She had told me that she had noticed that I tensed up and went quiet when he got close to me, and that had noticed him paying a lot of attention to me, and told me she believed me about the pictures. She was honestly amazing with how she handled it. She promised me that she would move things around where I'd be away from him in the lab, and asked if I wanted her to talk to him about it too. I said no, that I didn't want to make him angry, and she said that she respected that, but she was going to have the security guard stand at the door and watch me go to my car every night, and that she'd tell the program director what was going on, but Eddie wouldn't know that I talked to her. By the time that we had got done, it had been about 30 minutes at this point since class had ended, and she offered me to walk me outside. I'm glad that she did too, because when we came out of the elevator to the first floor, Eddie was sitting in the foyer, alone. Everyone else had gone home at this point, and my blood, it ran cold, but I tried to act as normal as I could. He seemed as surprised to see our professor there as she was to see him. She asked why he was still here, and he said that he noticed my car was still parked out front and wanted to make sure that I didn't have to walk out by myself. I'm pretty sure that I was pale as a ghost at this point, but my professor gave him a look that I couldn't read and said not to worry. She was walking me to my car, and from now on the security guard will be there every night. He said that was good and quickly said goodnight and left. It still chills me to think about what could have happened if my professor didn't walk me down to my car that night. I have no idea what he's capable of doing, but after this, she rearranged our seating and made sure that we never grouped together, and I started making sure I walked out to my car at the same time as a few other women in my class. The security guard was usually in the foyer, and we only had a couple of months left of class, so there weren't really any other incidences, but I still caught him staring at me sometimes, and to be quite frank, he looked like pure rage. I work at a hospital, a town over from where I live, and I work as an environmental service, aka housekeeping. Every hospital worker has to wear a badge with a picture, first name, and your department on it. I'm also a 5'2" girl, if this matters. So, I used to park out the front of our hospital instead of our designated parking space because, 1, it was more lit out in the front, and 2, it just seemed easier. I now park in the back in our designated area and walk out with a coworker who leaves at the same time that I do, though. When I get to work, it's still early evening, so around 4ish I'd say, and normally we have a few people outside and inside our waiting and wheelchair area, and you'll occasionally get a few, "Can you help me with this?" or "Do you know what floor so-and-so is?" So people are coming up to you because you're wearing scrubs and have a badge, and it isn't uncommon or weird at all. Except for this one time. I got to work a little early so I could eat before clocking in and getting right into work. I'm walking across this little crosswalk from the parking lot to the entrance when I get, "Hey miss, could you help me with something?" I turn around and see a decently dressed man in his mid-30s at best. I say, "Sure, what can I help you with?" He says, "My wife is on the 3rd floor, but I can't figure out what entrance to use." I say, "Sure, you'll want to use this one because the one all the way around to the left is for the emergency room and the one all the way across to the right is for the physical therapy and the senior center." He says, "Okay, thanks, and what time do the doors lock?" And I tell him 8. At this point, he nodded and just walked through the doors. I didn't think much of it, other than his wife was on the 3rd floor and he really should have known what door to use, especially since it had main entrance on the front, but I told my shift manager, who then radioed security, to maybe just keep an eye out for any weirdness. I finish my shift and it's about midnight when I finally get outside the doors and halfway to the crosswalk when I hear, "My name, it's good to see you." I turn my head to see the same guy from earlier on the bench outside. I give a polite nod and continue on my way to my car while unlocking my phone and getting my shift manager's office phone number up and ready to call. "Hey, I want to talk to you. Come and chat." Sorry, it's late and I have people up and waiting for me at home. Sorry. Wait, do you live around here?" I ignored him at this point and just continued to walk as fast as I could without running, and that's when I hear him speed up a little bit to catch up with me. "Come on, you're a pretty girl and I'm a decent guy. Why wouldn't you want to chat?" After that sentence, I'm about a foot or so away from my car, and I push my automatic lock and swing my purse off my shoulder so I can just chuck it into my car and slam myself in and get away from the dude. Hey! I slam my purse in and then slam myself in, all the while locking my doors and slamming my key in and getting ready to leave when he reaches my car and slaps his hands on my window. Hey, that's not cool. Let's just chat. I'm done talking to this guy at this point, and I'm seriously just ready to go home, so I rev my car a little to let him know that if he isn't moving, I'm running over his foot, and good thing that he can limp to the ER and explain how his foot was run over. I pull my car out of work and slowly one more time rev my engine so that he knows that I'm not fucking around, and he steps back and I pull up through a few parking spaces before speeding out and getting onto the road. The drive home was spent on the phone with my shift manager, who was radioing security to see if he was still out there and if they could still see him anywhere else on the location. They couldn't, but they checked the cameras back and saw him following me, and then me leaving, and about 2 minutes later, him leaving as well. The next was spent with security and them telling me that they're going to forward this to the police and to please use our designated parking space and to call if I see him in the building on my shift or when coming in and out of work. When I was 15, I enrolled in a program that allowed high schoolers to take classes at the local community college. The credits earned there would apply as both high school and college credits. My first semester as a part of this program, I took a basic English and creative writing type class, and I was by far the youngest student. My classmates found out pretty quickly that I was a minor too, and were curious why and how I was attending college classes while still in high school. I explained the situation to them, and they were all very nice and accommodating towards me, and I ended up exchanging instant messenger screen names with quite a few of them. One of my classmates to whom I gave my info to was a 19-year-old guy named Nick. He was a bit of an odd duck, to say the least. Short and chubby with a sparse beard, and he frequently wore a black cape lined with red on the inside to class. He seemed into darker stuff and was a huge fan of vampires and Satanism and listened to some intense music and all that. I didn't really mind at the time, to be honest. I was mostly just relieved to have made some friends despite my young age. He began to instant message me on a regular basis pretty quickly too. The classroom that we were in had computers for each of us, so Nick would often message me during class on those computers. At first, things seemed to be quite normal. We talked about our interests and hobbies, family, homework, assignments, and gossiped about our other classmates and whatnot. Pretty soon, though, Nick started bringing up some awkward topics that, as a naive 15-year-old girl, made me uncomfortable. Nick talked about how pretty he thought I was and would often tell me that I looked a few years older than I was. To be fair, I was quite tall for a 15-year-old, and said that I acted mature for my age. He asked if I had a boyfriend, and when I told him I did, he seemed upset and disappointed. He said if I broke up with my boyfriend and dated him, he would treat me like his vampire princess. He told me that he wanted to kiss me and touch me everywhere, and that he hoped that I would let him bite my neck. I politely yet firmly turned him down every time that he brought it up, but he just didn't seem to get the hint. Since I was too young for a driver's license, my mum had to pick me up from college campus and drive me home. Due to her schedule, I usually had to wait for her to pick me up outside the building my class was held in. Most of the time, I would have to wait about half an hour, and Nick started following me out of class and would often wait with me until my mum pulled up. He would pressure me for personal info and trash talk my current boyfriend. He commented that my boyfriend was probably cheating on me, so I should dump him preemptively. When my mum finally pulled up, I would breathe a sigh of relief and just jump into the car. Online, Nick began to get more aggressive too. Anytime he messaged me, he would start talking about my body in just really inappropriate ways for a 15-year-old. I would repeatedly tell him that I didn't like what he was saying, but no matter how many times I tried to steer the conversation away, he would always bring it back to the dirty talk. He told me that he didn't mind that I was mostly flat-chested, stating that he didn't need more than a handful. He told me that I should wear tighter clothing to class so that he could get a better image of what I looked like naked. He mentioned that he frequently fantasized about doing stuff to me while in class, and specifically mentioned bending me over the computer desks. When I was at home, I would refuse to respond to his messages if he took it too far. But when we were in class, I had no excuse as to why I wasn't messaging him back. He would sit next to me in class every day too, and would send me messages and then just stare at me until I replied. If I didn't, he would get upset and his messages would become more hostile. He would say things like, "Why aren't you responding to me? You know I can see you ignoring me. I thought that you were too young and pure to turn into one of those bitchy sluts, but I guess I was wrong." The messages would pop up one after the other until I replied, and I would often cave and say, "Sorry, I was just paying attention to the teacher and didn't see your messages." Of course, he'd immediately change his tune at this point and then start right back up with his twisted idea of a romantic conversation. I felt like there was no escaping his barrage of sexual commentary, and I vowed to just stick it out and make it to the end of the semester, and I thought if I get through the class that I could easily avoid him on campus in the spring. But everything came to a head towards the end of the full semester. Nick sat next to me in every class and messaged me constantly, calling me just weird pet names in front of other people, and would always try to be in physical contact with me. He'd put his arm around my shoulders and always wanted to hug me. It made me excruciatingly uncomfortable, but I was too shy and nervous to ask him to stop. I would shrug his arm off my shoulders and try to stick to high fives, and when he hugged me, I kept my hips as far away from his as possible. I even told one of the mentors at my youth group that there was someone at my college making me feel uncomfortable. At the time, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, so I asked my youth leader if I could forward him the parts of our online conversations that I thought were the most inappropriate. My youth leader's reaction quickly made me realize that this was serious, and he explained that what Nick was doing was both extremely inappropriate and also potentially illegal. He asked if I could keep him updated on the situation and to send him any more questionable messages. A couple of days later, Nick messaged me. For some reason, on that particular day, he was just acting extremely forward. He made several of the usual comments about my looks and body, and then started to say how frustrating it was that I was so hot at a young age. He told me that I was too beautiful and that it drove him crazy seeing me in person. Then he said something that just sent chills down my spine. He told me, "You're so sexy and gorgeous that I'd probably still fuck you even if you were dead." He then went on to describe in great detail how he had this fantasy of having sex with a girl who either was unconscious or freshly dead. And I mean, in great detail. I was absolutely horrified, obviously, and just sat there staring at the barrage of the messages as they popped up. After a few minutes, I was able to snap myself out of my terrified stupor and just immediately blocked him. I forwarded the messages to my youth leader, who became extremely incensed, and he urged me to tell my parents or the campus police so that they could help keep him away from me. He told me that this could be considered a threat and he wanted me to be safe. He seemed so afraid for me that it actually scared me even more, and I told him that I was thinking about telling someone and then signed off instant messenger. Unfortunately, I was young and stupid and did none of the things that he suggested. I finished the semester and avoided Nick like the plague. No small task, let me tell you. But I begged my mum to show up early so that I could leave class and jump right in the car, and the first time I did so, she looked behind me and said, "Hey, it's your little friend." I turned to see Nick standing outside the classroom building, wearing his black cape and staring blatantly at me. The look on his face was just one of cold and furious hatred. I ducked down and shouted, "Please drive, Mum." My mother looked at me, concerned, and then put the pedal to the floor. I did eventually give my mum a shortened explanation of what happened, leaving out some of the more grotesque details. She made a point to show up before my class ended every day and waited right outside of my building so I could run out and hop into the passenger side of the car. Fortunately, after he followed me outside a few more times, he just seemed to give up. He didn't try to talk to me in class and didn't follow me outside anymore, and I did catch him staring at me a few times in class though, but in general, he seemed to take the hint and just backed off. After that class ended, I never saw or heard from him again, and for that, I'm truly grateful. I don't know whatever happened to Vampire Nick, but I sure hope that his dreams, they're never fulfilled. I decided to backpack across Russia after college by myself. It was a country that I'd been intrigued by ever since I was an exchange student in college to China, and not far from the Russian border. I'd always wanted to ride the Trans-Siberian Railway, so at age 22, I found myself riding the longest train ride in the world, 6 days from Moscow to Vladivostok. I spoke no Russian, and I knew no one in and nothing about the place. Since I backpacked across China previously and usually had no problems finding accommodations in new cities at any hour of the day when I was there, I figured how hard could it be to just land there and find my way around. In my train car, I made the acquaintance of a young couple who were from that place. Katie was a thin, petite brunette who worked as a scientist, vaguely similar to Bjork in appearance, and told me that she was of partial gypsy ancestry. She was 27, and her husband Vlad was a big bruiser of a guy, in his mid-40s, with chipped front teeth and scars on his face, who had been a professional Russian soccer player. Only Katie spoke English, so it didn't seem out of place to me that she seemed much more interested in talking to me than Vlad did. Still, there were times when I just got a strange, vaguely hostile vibe from Vlad. Also, I chalked this up to language and cultural differences at the time, but it did strike me in passing as odd that Katie seemed to be enjoying talking to me in a way and with a frequency that I would have expected her to be talking to a partner like, rather than a man that she just met. She got surprisingly personal with me, and I learned that this was her second marriage and that she was the type of person to never show her anger to someone who had wronged her but never forgot or forgave either. Again, I didn't think much of it. When we reached the place, Katie and Vlad were much taken aback to hear that I didn't have any preset accommodations and didn't know anyone there. They were not at all keen on my plan of just wandering the city for a place to stay. It's a crime-ridden city, they warned, and the few hotels that there are quite expensive. No, I just had to come and stay with them for the 4 days until my train left for Harbin, China. But they apparently lived with Katie's mother, whom Katie told me would be happy to cook for me and would be delighted to meet someone from so far away. At this point, nothing felt off. I found Russians in general to be frosty on the surface, but with even a little bit of persistence, they open up and can be among the most warm and hospitable people anywhere. Katie lived with her parents and Katie's sister and young niece in a drab but spacious old Soviet housing block. There were always people around, and all of Katie's family and friends seemed intrigued to meet an American guy. My presence was definitely the talk of the neighborhood, and over the next few days, all sorts of people came over to try and practice their English with me, and the food and drink flowed. This was helped by the fact that Katie seemed overly eager to be in my presence and translate for me at every turn. One night, she showed me a Russian cartoon movie she'd loved as a child and sat next to me through the whole movie just translating it line by line for me. I woke up the day that my train was supposed to leave, and the apartment was just surprisingly quiet for the first time. I got dressed and walked around, and I soon found that the only other person in the apartment was Katie. She was lounging in a chair in the living room, the TV in front of her. She had on only a thin silk robe that barely covered her and had her legs spread wide apart. She looked up at me and said hi in barely a whisper, and had a look on her face that was absolutely neutral. I just stood there slack-jawed and really nervous, and not quite knowing how to proceed. I was a fairly sheltered and innocent kid with less than amazing social skills, but at the same time, I was very much an adult male. And it sure looked as if she was offering herself to me, but not entirely unambiguously. For some reason, I just couldn't shake the very real consideration that making a move on her could be precariously disastrous, especially if I was seeing something that wasn't really there. She could, after all, just be scantily dressed because she forgot that there was someone else in the house. But before I could resolve this drama, the front door opened loudly. It was Vlad. Katie gave a start, pulled her robe together, and said something surprised to him in Russian. He replied, and though I didn't understand him, he seemed to have an edge to his voice that just sent a chill through me. While they talked, I took the opportunity to wander into the bedroom that they had loaned me and do some reading just to distract myself. Katie dropped me at the train station by herself that evening and seemed truly sad to see me go, though she did say one thing that bothered me and seemed really out of place. She said, "You're like a child." She then kissed me on the cheek unexpectedly and bid me goodbye. It's been 16 years since this happened, and I've thought about it every now and then, and I shudder to think what might have happened to me if I had woken up that day thinking and acting much more instinctively. Also, was that whole situation just a trap that I narrowly missed stepping into? The whole thing just felt too planned. The way that there was no one but Katie in the apartment only that morning, and that Vlad came back just at the time that he did. I'm still not sure what happened that day, but I'm sure glad that I didn't take Katie up on her offer. I was 23 years old, in grad school working towards my MLIS and working part-time at the West Valley Library. I wasn't paid much at West Valley, so I applied for a position at the largest Stone River library system and was hired there. The new position required me to work hours at the Crestmont and Cherry Lane branches, but I continued working at West Valley too. My first shift with Stone River library system was a Monday night at the Cherry Lane branch. I didn't need much training because I was already familiar with the software they used and working with the public one, but one of my coworkers was explaining some of the unique policies this library had when a patron came up and asked where he could find some books about World War II. My coworker asked if I could handle the question, and I said that I could. But before the coworker walked away, he jokingly said to the patron, "Take it easy on her, she's new." The patron was heavy-set and looked to be in his mid to late 40s, I'd say. I told him that he'd want to look at the 940s in the adult non-fiction section, and he wandered away, but several minutes later, he came back. He said that he was having trouble finding the section and that maybe I could help him find the specific book that he wanted. I started searching our system for the title that he requested, and he then introduced himself to me as Jim and extended his hand over the desk to shake my hand. I awkwardly shook his hand and went back to searching for the book. He was acting overly familiar with me and was very talkative, telling me about himself and all that. Patrons being overly familiar and talkative isn't really that unusual in public libraries, to be honest. Often, people come to the library just to have someone to talk to, so we're conditioned to listen to people talk as we work, as long as it doesn't interfere with providing assistance to other patrons. Unfortunately, we didn't own the title that he was looking for, but I told him that I could place a hold on it and have it sent here from another library. I placed the hold, and I told him that he would get a phone call when the book arrived here for him. He then told me that the phone number on his account was his home phone number, but he would prefer that we call his cell phone. He said that he didn't want to do that because his wife wants calls about her books at home. He then suggested that instead, I could take his cell phone number and call him personally when his books arrive. I told him that I couldn't do that because I don't handle the items arriving from other libraries and I'm only here very part-time hours. He attempted a sad puppy dog face and said, "Come on, please, for me." I told him the best that I could do was change the phone number on his account to his cell phone, and he declined and didn't press this issue any further. He then asked if I could show him to the 940s in adult nonfiction. I walked across the library to the non-40 section with him, and I don't remember our exact conversation in the stacks, but he was clearly trying to flirt with me, and at some point, he said something along the lines of, "You look so young, but you seem really to know what you're doing. It's hard to believe that you're new here." I told him that I'm new to this library system, but I've worked at another library nearby for several months, and I also worked in another branch of this library system. He then dropped all pretense of looking for World War II books and started grilling me with personal questions. I sidestepped the questions as best as I could and completely made up the few things I did tell him, but I've always had trouble politely disengaging from uncomfortable conversations like this. After 15 minutes, I told him that the library was really busy tonight and I needed to get back to the circulation desk. As I turned to walk out of the aisle, he grabbed my wrist to stop me, held it very tightly and said, "You should give me your number." I was completely shaken that he had touched me, and I wasn't concerned about being polite anymore, and I semi-screamed, "No, I'm not interested," and yanked my arm out of his grasp. I power-walked back to the circulation desk and into the staff room, where I then caught shit from the supervisor on duty for disappearing for almost 20 minutes. By the time that my chat with the supervisor was over, Jim had left the library. I quickly went back to the computer where I had placed the hold for him, opened the transaction log and opened his library account from there, and I wrote down his card number, his full name and his address. The next day was my first day of work at the Crestmont branch. It was uneventful, and Thursday I worked at the Crestmont branch again. When I arrived, the supervisor told me that someone called looking for me on Wednesday but didn't want to leave a message. I had no idea who it could have been and just kind of shrugged it off at the time. Later that day, my coworker told me that there was someone on the phone for me. I picked up the call and it was Jim. He said that he was just calling to talk, and this had the hair on the back of my neck standing up because I realized that he must have been the person who called looking for me yesterday. I told him that I can't just talk to people on the phone while I'm at work and not to call here again. He said if I gave him my cell phone number that he would call me when I'm not at work and then we would talk. I told him again that I was not interested and I hung up the phone. The supervisor overheard this too, and I explained what happened at the Cherry Lane branch, and she wrote up an incident report about everything, which she sent to the director of SRLS and the supervisors at all 4 branches. Friday afternoon, the director of SRLS called me at home. He told me that Jim had apparently called all 4 branches on Wednesday and showed up at one branch trying to find me and asking where and when I would be working next. The director emailed me a letter drafted by SRLS lawyers and that he planned to send Jim and asked me to read it over to make sure everything was accurate. The letter summarized the incidences from Cherry Lane on Monday and Crestmont on Thursday, warned Jim that library patrons are not permitted to interfere with the library employee while she is performing her duties, and went on to say, if it were not apparent from the employee's tone of voice, I want to make it clear that your personal attention directed to her is unwanted. It is expected that you will not continue to seek out interactions with this employee. All future interactions you have with library employees will be based upon library services and will not become personal. Failure to comply with this warning will result in you being banned from the library system for a period of time, commensurate with your misconduct. I told the director that I thought that this might be a little bit harsh because I could just be overreacting about the whole situation, but he said that everything about Jim's interactions with me had been completely inappropriate and he wanted to stop it in its tracks. And so I agreed that he should send the letter. On Sunday, I worked at the West Valley Library, and shortly after the library opened, I answered a phone call and it was Jim. I was shocked and a bit scared because I never told him that I worked at this library. He said that he really wanted to see me and that if I wouldn't talk on the phone, he would come to the library and we could talk in person. I wanted to be completely clear at this point, so I told him that I was sorry if I gave him the wrong impression, but I'm not interested in talking to him on the phone or in person or ever again at all. He started saying things like, "I thought you were a good person. You seem so nice. You shouldn't treat me like this." I said that I had to go and just hung up the phone. My coworker who overheard the conversation convinced me to file a police report, just in case at this point. The police arrived shortly after that, and I sat down with them and just went over everything. They told me that they were going to stop by Jim's house the next day to speak with him about the situation and see where things stand, and that if I see him following me anywhere that I should call 911 immediately. Monday night, I worked at the Cherry Lane branch again, and I was kind of nervous that Jim might come in since he knew that I would be working there, and because he had probably just received a warning letter from my boss and a visit from the cops, but he didn't show up, thankfully. My co-workers and I walked to the staff parking lot together after closing too, and as we approached our cars, I saw that my car's hood was popped. When we got closer, I saw that all 4 windows plus the front and rear windshields had been smashed in. There were also dozens of deep dents to the metal panels and cracks and holes just punched through the bumpers and other plastic sections of my car. And inside, it looked like someone had poured bleach just all over the black cloth seats. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my legs just stopped supporting me. I collapsed on top of the blacktop and I just immediately threw up. This was the first and only time in my life that I've experienced an actual panic attack. My co-workers hoisted me back up and half ran and half dragged me back into the library where they called 911. When the police arrived, I told them about Jim. They located Jim's car several blocks away, and inside it, they found empty bleach containers, a hammer and a full set of his clothing, shoes, socks, pants, underwear, a shirt and a sweater. When they visited his house, his wife told the police that he was at a local bar watching a football game. Strangely enough though, the police were just never able to locate Jim, and as far as I understand, he just never returned to his house or his wife after that. I didn't stick around to find out though, and after the next 2 days I quit both of my jobs and just dropped out of school and broke my apartment lease, and I just moved several hundred miles away. These days, because of everything that happened, I now carry a pepper spray and I'm actually a black belt, and I don't run from threats anymore, that's for sure. I lived in a very quiet rural town when I was younger, and there was only one stoplight, a Safeway, and one gas station with little mum and pop shops in between. I lived 35 minutes out of town on a street with only 5 other people on it, all a good walking distance from each other, meaning that you couldn't see your neighbours out your window. I was only 10 or 12 at the time, and my older brother, who had received his license recently, wanted any excuse to take the car out, and me being an annoying little sister always begged to tag along. I can't remember what he had gone out for, but it was 11:30 at night and we had just turned on our long winding street. I lived in the PNW, so the pine trees, they tower over you and can sometimes give you the feeling of being enclosed. And it was a particularly foggy night, so visibility was pretty limited. So I was looking towards my brother from the passenger seat, not paying any attention to the road, and all of a sudden, my brother slams on his brakes hard enough that I nearly hit the dashboard. I had my mouth open, about to yell at him, when I see his face is petrified with an expression that I just couldn't pinpoint. His lips were pinched together, his nostrils flaring, and I could hear his breathing. His eyes were wide open and locked on like a missile to its target. I finally allowed my eyes to follow his gaze, and in the middle of the street, a low fog on the road, were 2 individuals in black robes with their hoodies on. These robes were the real thing too, just like the Grim Reapers or something, were wider at the opening of the sleeves, and the hood just completely covered their faces so we couldn't see anything. But we sit there for what felt like forever, just staring at them in our headlights, and then they just start to walk towards us. At this point, my scared shitless little self had both hands on my brother, shaking his arm violently back and forth, screaming, "Lock the doors." He cries out, I am, and pressing the lock button, we hear the reassuring sound. These people were crawling towards the car though in perfect sync, stepping slowly at the same time. We watched them as they made their way to the front of the car and then make the slight turn as they began walking by the driver's side. My brother and I were stuck in fear, just staring as they walked past us and disappeared into the dark in our rearview mirror. We sped home and freaked out, telling our dad everything, who then called the cops, who reported multiple sightings of these two and then instructed us not to confront them. I never heard or saw anything about them again, but I'm pretty sure that they were a part of some cult. When I was a child, from 3 to 6 years old I'd say, my mum moved from Sao Paulo, a huge city in Brazil, to a small town next to Amazonas forest, across the country. She was a single mum with 2 kids, my brother being just a year older than me. We were rich back then and looked rich as well, even though my mum didn't like to show it off, but we always had nice hair and skin. What I mean by this is that rich people look rich even when they don't want to. So, the only asphalt street in the town was the main avenue that connected 2 highways. All the other streets were dirt. There were no apartment buildings in there, so Mum bought a nice blue house to us. The house had a small front yard and a huge backyard with grass and mango and papaya trees. She worked all day, and we went to school in the morning and spent the afternoon just playing with the kids from the neighborhood, with a maid at home to take care of us and all that. Mum arrived in the evening and the maid left. One day, my mum woke up pretty late. She didn't hear the alarm clock, and neither did we, the kids. We overslept till noon, and this had never really happened before. My brother always woke up early by himself, still to this day even. She woke up and realized that the entire house was upside down. After waking us up without understanding a thing, my mum went to the kitchen to make breakfast, and then she saw that all the electronics were missing. TV, stereos, even some food and her jewelry and clothes, and everything was just a mess. She then called her brother that lived a few houses away, and until he got there, she made us stay in our room and started to search the site where the house was built. They found out that someone leaked formaldehyde in the air conditioning system. We passed out, and they just entered the house and stole everything that they could. I was 4 years old at the time, and my brother was 5, and I actually remember this pretty clear. There were iron bars in the window, but they had been cut so that they could enter. And now that I'm 30-ish, I think that they could have done whatever they wanted to us, to be honest. They could have raped us, or kidnapped us, killed us, whatever they wanted, really. And the creepiest part is that we lived there for 2 more years after that. This happened to me when I was a kid, 10 to be exact. I grew up in a military family and lived in the Middle East for a significant portion of my life. Because of this, we frequently traveled to different countries because of the low cost and proximity. On this particular vacation, we flew into Cairo, Egypt for a long weekend. We only lived like 2 or 3 hours away at this point. It was late at night and we were staying in the Marriott Hotel, which had a taxi or shuttle service that was supposed to pick us up. But for some reason, our driver just never showed those, so we were forced to find a regular taxi to take us there, which took forever to find that late at night. We finally found one though that was offering us a pretty good deal. They don't run by meters there. Instead, they just kind of give flat rates that they choose. And we just headed towards the hotel. Out of nowhere, though, another taxi basically T-bones us in the middle of the road, causing us to stop. There aren't really defined roads in a lot of Arab places, so it isn't really that surprising that we got hit. And in very typical nature for the nation, the 2 drivers get out of their cars, each yelling that it was the other's fault and looking like they were going to throw hands or something. Eventually, they got back into their respective taxis and parted ways. My family and I were completely taken aback, We had been in Egypt less than 2 hours at this point and had already had quite the adventure. We finally get to the hotel, exhausted because it must have been 3 a.m. by this point. Our driver helped us get all of our bags out and get settled and told us that he felt so bad about the car accident that he offered to pick us up the next morning and take us to the Great Pyramids, which was on our agenda anyway for a super cheap rate. My parents agreed and decided on a time for him to come, though I can't remember when. Flash forward to the next morning and everyone's ready for the day, excited to see how crazy it was going to be. Our driver was outside just waiting for us, leaning against the car like someone in an old movie, right when he said that he'd be there. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that had a deep tan at the time, and being in Egypt, that was a pretty rare sight. When the driver saw me in the daylight, he gave me the creepiest, most unsettling look that just sent chills down my spine, even as a 10-year-old. I knew then, too, that something just wasn't right with him. Nonetheless, we got into his taxi and headed towards the pyramids. He continued to try and talk to me and joke around with me the whole ride too, something that I found to be pretty creepy, mind you, and bold since both my parents were in the car too. We get super close and there's an entrance that people can go through and walk the long distance to the pyramids, and there is an entrance that taxis can go through too. You have to pay to see them, strange but true, and our driver keeps making jokes about my blonde hair and blue eyes all the time and bringing up that he could get me into the pyramids for free, so my parents wouldn't have to pay the extra ticket price, that is. But we laughed it off and my parents paid him and said thank you and began to exit the taxi. I don't remember how it happened, but at some point after I got out of the car, he did too and directed me towards his trunk. I was confused and thought that we had forgotten something, so I stayed behind as my parents walked towards the gate to get whatever I thought that we had left. The driver pops the trunk, but there wasn't anything in it. And then he grabbed my arm and put a hand on my back, trying to push me into the trunk, and said, "I'm getting you in for free," over and over again as I resisted. And naturally, I freaked out and screamed out to my mum and my dad at the top of my lungs, and I was just terrified. But when they heard me and noticed that I wasn't behind them, they started sprinting back towards the car. But when the driver heard me scream, he immediately let go of me, closed the trunk, and just drove away just as my parents started to run to me. I was crying my eyes out, terrified out of my mind, knowing that this taxi driver tried to put me in his trunk and drove away the second that I screamed for help. It's really scary to think what could have happened to me had he been stronger or more prepared or something. Or perhaps faster even. He's still the reason too that I'm still terrified of taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, and any sort of car service of that nature. Two years ago, I drove from San Diego to Anza-Borrego Desert to solo camp. I had followed a dirt trail that led into the desert where I did some off-roading and sightseeing and whatnot. When it got dark, I decided to just sleep in my truck and get up early to check out Salvation Mountain, which wasn't super far away at this point. Being the middle of the desert in the winter, I kept the truck running off and on. I slept in the bed of my truck, which had a camper shell in it. I'd basically just wake up when I got super cold and reach in and turn the engine on and let the heater run for a bit. If I'd wake up, I'd just reach in and turn it off. Well, I woke up to what I thought was just a bad dream. My truck was moving. I initially panicked, thinking that I was rolling down a hill or something, but as I stood up, I could see someone driving my truck through the little square window. I freaked and I laid my head back down and was certain that I wasn't spotted. I didn't want to reveal myself and genuinely feared for my life. I mean, how the fuck somebody was out there was just beyond me. A small part of me wondered if this person was lost and needed help and was in a desperate attempt to just steal a truck to get to safety or something, but I highly doubted that and continued to lay still. He drove it all the way back up the trail that I came in on too, and as soon as he hit the highway, he just floored it. After many, many hellish miles, he parked at a convenience store finally. He left my truck running, and I watched him get out and light up a cigarette, and he paced towards the end of the store, and I got out and jumped up front and nearly peeled out in reverse. I drove across the street and called 911 and kept my eyes on him, and he took off running, and after giving chase in my truck, I lost him near a trailer park. I called the police again and let them know, but who knows if they found him. I ended up in a random-ass town off the highway, and it was the freakiest moment and feeling that I've ever experienced. Oh, and if you're wondering, I didn't lock my truck because I would have locked the keys inside my truck. But to sleep in my camper shell, I have to walk around the truck and climb in through the tailgate. So to stay warm, I just kept the keys in the ignition so that I could periodically reach in through the small square window into the cab and just turn the truck on and off. But let me tell you, I could just barely reach the keys in the ignition through that small window. I kept them in there to avoid dropping the keys too in the cab and therefore just locking myself out. Not long ago, my partner and I were driving through reservation land at about 11 o'clock at night, in the desert southwest of the USA. We were on a major highway, but as with so many highways in that area, it's not very well used, just barely paved and with only one lane going in each direction. There were no lights, just reflectors embedded in the pavement too, and it's not uncommon to go for an hour on this highway without seeing another vehicle. I was reading a book aloud when suddenly my buddy who was driving interrupts and pulls off on the side of the road, braking quickly. "Hey man, did you see that?" No," I replied. "See what?" "The van. It went off the road." I turned in my seat, but couldn't make out anything on or off the road. It was just darkness all around, and he grabbed the flashlight that we keep in the car and asked me to call 911. He's in a medical profession and a lapsed licensed EMT, and I've worked in an emergency response kind of unit, so this isn't a super uncommon occurrence for us, although not even being able to see the accident was a first for me. I got on the phone with 911 immediately and set about trying to find a mile marker using my phone as a flashlight, eventually settling for giving them approximate GPS coordinates as I had very little coverage and my GPS was acting flighty in that area. The dispatcher asked me to cross the highway carefully and try to ascertain the status of the passengers since they had gone straight over a hill and presumably into the canyon below. I stayed on the line while I trudged over the sand dunes on the opposite side of the highway. I was a bit nervous to be walking in this area in sandals as we had just recently been discussing the rattlesnake population in the region and I couldn't really see where I was going and answer the dispatcher questions at the same time. But the scrubby vegetation gave me some purchase and finally I crested the largest dune and could see the outline of the accident site. On the road, the moonlight was blocked by the dunes, but on this side, it was strangely bright. It took my brain a moment to make sense of what I was seeing. They had been lucky, to be honest. The van had turned on its side as it slid, and the friction from the dunes had just barely prevented the entire thing from going straight over the edge into the massive canyon below. My partner called out to me and asked me to check on the woman in the van, and I saw that next to him, standing with a scarecrow-like stiffness, was a young man. He looked dazed and didn't seem to be answering many questions, and I got the darkest vibe off of that guy that I've ever encountered. I felt goosebumps just crawling up my back, and it was just like there was a permanent ring of shadow around him or something. I felt really uneasy knowing that either of us were anywhere near him and made a point to keep a visual checking up on him. I proceeded to the site and around the van and called out to identify myself. I heard the voice of a woman inside, and as I walked around to the windshield, I could see her. She was crouched in the passenger cabin, clearly in shock, her feet bleeding as she shifted back and forth in the broken glass of the driver's side window. She was a tall, willowy woman, thin and pale with dark hair. There was also a massive wolfhound panting. It appeared equally stunned, and I saw that they had managed to pry the passenger side door open, and the man must have climbed out through the top that way. But the woman spoke with me for a time, calmly and with an urgency that I couldn't quite identify in her voice, and I relayed the information to the dispatcher. Yeah, it was just the two of them. No, they don't seem to be seriously injured. No, nobody's fallen asleep at the wheel or anything. They were on their way to Texas, apparently, to visit family. They were living out of the van, I think. What I remember most clearly is that I made a couple of attempts to convince her to either climb out of the roof or through the back to clear away from the van just to be safe. But she politely refused each time. She said that she didn't want to leave the dog. And there was just something really wrong about her demeanor. People react differently to stress, and she seemed alert and competent, so I just kind of put it to the back of my mind though, but I kept being struck by a strangeness in her handling of the situation, if that's the right words. Dispatch and I agreed that the paramedics could probably easily break the windshield to free them, and there was no sign of fuel, so it was fine for her to stay in there until they arrived. Once I double-checked that she was secure and wasn't going anywhere, I handed off the phone to my partner while I went out to wave in the paramedics, who had accidentally passed the site and were backing towards us from farther up the highway, looking for our flashlight thanks to the dispatcher. They pulled off a ways up from the site, and I began to brief them when we all heard dispatch come over the radio. They said to us, "Please be advised that the male passenger is AMS and considered dangerous." AMS stands for altered mental status, suggesting that someone isn't in the normal frame of mind or for a variety of reasons. We all stopped in our tracks, and the paramedics exchanged a glance and one went back to the ambulance for additional equipment. I was eager to get back to my partner to make sure that he hadn't communicated that to the dispatch out of concern for his safety, but when we arrived on site, they were still talking quietly. I went to my car to find shoes for the woman, and the passengers were placed in the different ambulances, and the police arrived to take interviews all around. Just as we were about to leave, an officer, taking our statements, turned to us and said, "Yeah, well, it's pretty messed up. I guess she was driving and he wanted to kill them both, so he grabbed the wheel and overpowered her. It's lucky that either of them are alive, in fact." After a couple of hours, when we were back to driving, my partner proceeded to fill in the details. So when we first got to the scene, the woman was yelling that he had tried to kill her and not to leave her alone with him. She also said that if she got out, that he needed to be restrained as he was a danger to himself and others. The man was very eager to be out of the vehicle, and bewildered, my partner had nonetheless helped the guy pry the door open, and once he was out, the guy just clammed up and wouldn't do much more than nod or shake his head in response to questions. He kept thinking that the guy might take off and get lost in the desert or something, but in the end he just waited there. He said that the guy had seemed agitated, so he was doing his best to keep him engaged and distracted until help could arrive. It was honestly chilling to realize that what we had thought was an accident was actually a murder-suicide attempt. I really wanted to accompany the woman to the hospital, but for unrelated reasons, we just couldn't remain. We went back that way during the day on our return trip a week later, though, and we pulled over at the site and climbed over the dunes to see whether they had managed to tow the van over all that sand. And sure enough, it was gone. What was unnerving, though, was the realization, upon seeing the landscape during the day, that if he had chosen any other spot to grab the wheel for miles in both directions, they would have been over a cliff almost immediately. In the dark, there was no way for him to tell, but he had chosen the only spot where they realistically could have survived the accident. My partner then told me that they had gone off the road when they were nearly opposite our little sedan on the highway. And if the guy had opted for a head-on collision instead of the off-the-cliff option, he would have been toast. And quite honestly, it was a sobering thought. I think of that woman that I met that night often, and of her wolfhound being gingerly coaxed into the back of a police car. I really hope that they're in a much better place now. As for that guy who tried to kill them all, I certainly hope that he gets help and that we never have cause to see that guy again. 2 years ago, right around Halloween in fact, I was babysitting for these two ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m. I'd say, and the boys were sitting on the couch just playing on their iPads and whatnot when somebody knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over, and they both said no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door, and it's some guy in a grey hoodie, deliberately hunched over so that I can't see his face. And immediately, I'm like, nope, and don't say anything and start pacing around because I don't want to give him any inclination that we're inside. A couple of minutes later, I check outside the little window through the curtains and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just kind of let it go as a prank. Cut to a few hours later, and the mum gets back. They ask me how everything was, and I say that the kids were great, but somebody had come to the door. They ask me what time, and I say around 8, and one of the mums starts freaking out and going through her phone. The other one tells me that right around that time, somebody's been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and was saying things like, "I can see you through the window." They didn't think it was serious because it just didn't make sense in the context of where they were, but in retrospect, we're almost positive that it was me that he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to my car, and I touched base later, and apparently nothing strange ever happened after that. But I'm just really glad that I didn't open that door, because I have a feeling in my gut that it would have ended really badly. I was 21 at the time, a college scholarship athlete, and looking for a great time after a team win. This took place in 2014, and my football team had just got back from a dub at an away game, amped up that we were ready to hit the town and celebrate with our school. This was a small town where students would have parties and townies. But people from the town that just didn't want to attend our school would show up sometimes. No biggie, we just wanted to drink anyway. So I got a word from one of my teammates that we were having a party, and to my delight, he lived 2 blocks away. I show up fashionably late, half tipsy from pre-gaming, and start enjoying myself. This was a football player's house, my teammate, and when he throws a party, everybody comes. There were a few townies there too, but not a noticeable amount, and this house was packed though. I mean, our football team alone is 200 guys strong, and about 150 of them were there. I was making my way through the kitchen, and I bumped into this guy. Now, remember that we were packed like sardines in there, but this townie did not take too kindly to me making my way through. He shoved me hard, and me being tipsy, pushed him back, still in game time mode. It's important for me to note too that I was actually a pretty fearless guy up to this day. I've gotten into my fair share of youthful trouble and fights, and I was ready to go, if you know what I mean. So he started talking about, watch where you're going, don't you see me here, yada yada yada. We got into each other's face, and it was about to go down in his kitchen. His friends and 2 townie chicks started pulling him away, and I was held back by my teammates. And by this time, all eyes were on us. And by all eyes, I mean all 40-ish people in the kitchen within earshot, because the music was thumping. Reminder that this is my teammate's house, so this guy gets kicked out of the door along with his townie friends, and they were way outnumbered. The whole way out of the door, he's yelling that I'll see you when I see you, and all that type of shit. I'm like, okay, whatever, and get back to my after-game business trip of drinking and drinking some more. 3 hours pass, and the party starts to die down, and I'm totally lit, and I'm ready to bounce at this point. I live right around the way, so I slink out the door and start the 2-block walk back to my house. I'm halfway down the street from my house, and all of a sudden, a white SUV cuts across the middle of the road with the headlights on me. I'm alone now, and far enough away from the party house that I can't see anyone, and still a block away from my house. He opened the driver door, and who was it that I see? You guessed it. My new buddy that got kicked out of the party. Fuck it. I guess we're about to do this right here then. He opens the door, but I'm blinded by the headlights, and all I hear is this, a round being loaded into a chamber, and then, what do you got to say now, huh? He's about 5 steps from me now and runs up and puts the gun up to my forehead. I was tipsy and kind of really in the moment, and I can't really say what I thought about anything specific at this moment, but I was more so just going from, okay, we're about to duke it out, to, shit, that's a real gun, isn't it? And it was. Old dumbass drunk me too says, oh, so you're gonna shoot me now? Well, his pistol was literally on my forehead. He stood there for a few seconds and said, nah, and then attempted to hit me with the pistol in my head. As soon as it moved away from my head, I grabbed that hand and we started fighting right there in the middle of the street. I got a few blows in and he got a few blows in, and the gun was dropped and I finally got him into what was somewhat of a lock. I had him stuck, basically, and this is when I remembered that there were other figures in the car that I could vaguely make out, and I think it was the 2 chicks, and they just sat there and watched this whole incident go down. Worried about one of them coming out to grab the gun, I let go of the guy, and he was way out of breath at this point, and I grabbed the gun and dropped out the magazine and tossed the magazine as far as I could. But by this time, the adrenaline was going strong, and I just wanted to get the fuck away from the spot. The guy started standing up and said, I need that, pointing to the gun, and I, being drunk and starting to feel the weight of the situation, said, okay, are you good? Is this done? Wanting to get the situation over with without a cap in my ass as I'm getting away, I emptied the barrel, and sure enough, there was actually a round in the chamber, and the fucking safety was off too. Only the Lord knows why I didn't just take off with the gun. I still can't give an answer for that, in fact, and I just wanted to go home, and I was not trying to wait around to call the cops or be there when he realizes the mag is missing. So I give the gun back. Again, I don't know why. I was just in an odd state of shock and compliance, I think. And at this point, I take off till I'm a safe distance away. I know, I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to get away from that spot, and that's all I can say. Anyway, I walk in my door and close it behind me, and my roommate is on the couch playing Xbox, and I just started bawling. The brevity of just how careless I was with my response and the potentiality of what could have happened just hit me like a ton of bricks. He asked me what was up, and all I could say was that I just had a gun put to my head, man. Up until this point, I was pretty much truly fearless. I didn't care about hurting myself, I didn't care about hurting others, and the stupidity of my ignorant, thoughtless response tore me apart. The turmoil of getting a gun pulled on me was not what made the tears roll, though. I mean, I had just given another human a choice about whether I lived or die. And my greatest blessing in the world was only born 3 months prior to my beautiful daughter. Why didn't I think of her? I almost got shot. And what for? To be honest, I was completely ashamed of myself, and I felt like I turned my back on my daughter in that moment. I was ashamed that everything I worked for in my life, I just put up for grabs for a split second. I called this guy's bluff and won the hand, but did I really win? I wouldn't say so. In the end, I don't go out like I used to, and it was the last time I drank in that manner too. I don't believe that the alcohol was a factor in the lead up to the situation, but it sure did lend to my careless response, that's for sure. I never knew real fear until the thought of my daughter being fatherless flashed in my mind after, and that could have been my reality and hers that night. And I left that decision up to a drunk stranger that I pissed off. I've only told this to a handful of people, and I know it sounds crazy, but the only other person who can confirm any of it is my little brother, who has since passed away. So when I was very young, I rented my first house, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranch-style house with a full basement. I rented it from my aunt, who recently married into the family, She had inherited the house from her grandfather. But the house had been in their family since its original construction, when it was a one-room, no plumbing or electricity house. As time went on, the house was expanded and updated. Her grandfather and his dad actually ran the original electricity in the house. My uncle and aunt bought a new house and were starting a family, but they wanted to keep the ranch house, so this was a perfect arrangement for everyone. So I moved into the house on my own, but a few other people had a key to get in. My brother, a friend, and my aunt and uncle had a key. But the only time I locked the door was when I left or was sleeping. Most friends or family just walked in when I was home, and my brother would sleep over a few nights a week, and he would spend time in my new home even if I wasn't home, so yeah, he was there pretty much all the time. But shortly after moving in, some really weird shit started happening. Things would just go missing or be found where they had no right or reason being there. I'd hear steps in the hallway and then a bedroom door slam close. When I would investigate, no one would be there obviously, no one else in the house. This would happen a few times a week too, and sometimes if I ignored it, the door would open and slam shut 3 times in a row. This would happen with no windows open and with no AC or heat current, but still, I convinced myself that it must have just been bad hinges settling or my imagination or something. But shortly after that, I started hearing voices, loud enough to hear but too hushed to make out what was being said. So I'd turn on the TV or play music over it. I almost always had music on anyways, and I would tell myself that I was just being paranoid. Next came lights flashing on and off. This was always coming from another room, and I'd see it happening in the kitchen if I was in the living room, or see it down the hallway coming from the restroom if I was in the kitchen counter cooking. I would tell myself that it was due to the old DIY wiring being flaky, and it would happen quick and fast, and the light would go on and off and on and off and on and off, just enough to really get my attention, and then that was it. It wasn't long after that, too, that I would see things fly by my peripheral vision. This was random, and I must admit, this was quite scary. Up to this point, things had only happened when I was home alone, but this happened a few times when people were over visiting too. However, no one else noticed but me. People would see me react, but that was all, and it was actually really awkward. About this time too, the light on and off game would end with the light being on. I would have to manually flip the switch off, and this really freaked me out, as I could no longer blame it on bad wiring, as bad wiring wouldn't flip the switch up and down. I came full circle and just stopped explaining it all away and accepted that my house was actually haunted. When I told people that I had a ghost too, they would laugh and then nothing would happen while they were over, so I guess I just kind of looked crazy. When I would investigate the doors or turn a light off after the light game, things would calm down, but after some time, I just stopped investigating. I mean, why bother? This, though, would cause things to get worse. Then, many lights would go on and off, and many doors would slam. Keys that I just put down in their spot would disappear, and I would literally freak out and have to block doors open with chairs, and I would yell things like, "Okay, I get it, you're pissed. You have my full attention now." And with that, things would calm down. But from here on out too, little things didn't happen in little spurts. When things happened, it was 2 or 3 things at once, and things would accelerate quickly. So I would yell something like, "I know you're here, knock it the fuck off." And just as I'd yell that, someone would walk through my door, all like, "What did I do?" taking it personally. I'm sure I looked crazy, but this happened enough times that when multiple things would happen, I'd say something smart like, "Thanks for the heads up, I wonder who's coming over." Or I'd yell, "Come on in, I'm in the kitchen." Next, this only happened a few times as I moved soon after this, but I'll tell you the first thing that happened with my brother present. So, I'd been out pretty late at night, and I came home, and shortly after, my brother came over too after he got off work, second shift. But we were in my kitchen, just music on and eating and talking, and Out of nowhere, something flew across the kitchen. We both reacted too. Then it flew back and nearly giving us whiplash. We looked at each other like, what the fuck? We went to the far corner of the long kitchen where we thought whatever it was went, and nothing was there. It flew by again one last time, over our shoulders and close enough to feel the breeze this time, and I was actually happy someone else saw what I was seeing. We were both freaked out though, and to this day, I think things happened to him when he was in that house alone too. I think he wrote it off and just kind of explained it away, but he was in that house far less than me, but he was really the only person to spend hours or days in that house besides me. Some other things that happened too were every time it rained, just hundreds of little frogs would fill the basement. I don't know where they went or where they came from, but on one occasion too, a huge black snake was in my bed. It crawled up between my legs, and within a few minutes of being in bed, I screamed and just jumped out. My brother ran in, turned on the light, and pulled back the blanket, and we saw this huge black snake. He threw it out of the house, but I just often felt like I was being watched or lightly touched on the shoulder or neck from behind. I only lived in that house for a little under 6 months, and my uncle swore me to secrecy because he was afraid of what my aunt would say if I told her about it, that it would upset her. She loved the house, and her grandparents actually raised her, and she actually grew up in that house, and she never had any bad experiences in there too. I don't know what all this was about, but any thoughts or ideas on what could have been in that house would be much appreciated. Also, any ideas on why it seemed to want me to be scared and to look crazy would also be much appreciated. This happened a little bit ago, about a month, and it was a bizarre experience to say the least. I'm 15 and I was playing some video games before passing out, and it was about, say, 11 p.m. when I hear the doorbell ring. Out of instinct, I began walking downstairs, but about halfway, the rationality came to mind. I mean, who the fuck rings a doorbell at 11 p.m., right? I silently strode back upstairs and stood in the hall, kind of expecting something bad to happen. And an exact minute later, it rings twice. My parents begin to leave their room and give me a quizzical look, and all I had was a shrug for a response. Then, he starts banging on the door. My mother jumps up at the first bang, and my father's eyes widen, but more in confusion than fear. He decided to go downstairs and peep through the view hole, and it was our neighbor. My dad hesitantly opened the door, and I could hear my father's voice tremble slightly. Hey, what do you need? Next thing I hear is an entire full-blown scream argument from my neighbor, claiming that this household was his and that we stole it from him. My father's uneasiness was quickly replaced with annoyance, and he simply shut the door without giving our neighbor the time of day. My dad stepped on the first step going up the stairwell when our neighbor first hit the door. I'm not talking banging with a fist. This man was full body slamming it. My father was stunned for a second, and my neighbor charged the door again. This time, we began to hear the splintering of the wood too, and everyone reacted at once. My father went to brace the door with his body, my mother went to get the 2 other kids, and I went for 911. But the body slamming ensued for about 5 minutes too, and while I was on the phone with 911, mind you, it stopped. I thought it was over at that point, and to be honest, I was relieved, but I still stuck on the phone for a bit. I go peek out the front window of my house, and boy, was it only getting started. Our neighbor took his Jeep Wrangler and simply directed it straight at our house. We had zero clue what he was doing until he hit the gas and we heard the squealing of the tires, and then he immediately hit the brakes. He was trying to scare us out of the house, I think, and I was still on the phone with 911, and I stepped away from the window to comfort my siblings, crack jokes and such, and eventually the police arrived and arrested him. The next morning, I left for school, still shaken from the night before, and I stepped onto our front steps and saw tire marks leading up to our front door. In other words, the lunatic actually nearly rammed our door down with his car. I really never want to see this guy again, but he lives directly right next to me, so fuck my life. This happened about 4 years ago. Some backstory first. I'm from Australia and lived there during this event. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in another country but was visiting me over Christmas break. I lived in a big city which, if you drove about an hour in any direction, would either lead to another city or beautiful nature, in my opinion anyway. My friends and I decided to take my girlfriend at the time to see some of this beautiful nature and decided on a national park about an hour and a half from where we lived. This place is definitely no sort of secret location and it's pretty well known, but there are a ton of different areas to it, all with different rural and windy roads that take you to various areas of the park. We had gone in 2 different cars too, my friends in one and me and my girlfriend in the other to have some time together. So, we finished out the day of hiking and were heading home down one of the less common roads, and I remember seeing this really beat-up old 70 sedan with a wild-looking dude in the driver's seat drive past us in the other direction. This wasn't uncommon, as there are a lot of smaller, less economically sound towns spattered around the area, but for some reason, him and his car just stood out, and my girlfriend noticed it as well. About 200 meters further down the very windy road, there was a pull-off area, just a semicircle of gravel that you could pull off to look at the view towards the ocean and whatnot. There was a camper van belonging to a company that mostly rented out colourful vans to backpackers parked there, with a woman just standing in front of it. And as soon as she sees us, she jumps out onto the road and flags us down. Now, these days, I've read enough things to know that pulling over to help someone on a quiet road might not be the safest idea, but back then I hadn't, and my friends were in the car directly behind us. Luckily, she wasn't the person that I didn't want to meet. She was quite obviously upset and scared when we pulled in, and I told my girlfriend to wait in the car and I got out to speak to her. She was almost in tears, and I can't remember exactly where she was from, but it was a Central European country from memory, touring around with her 4 or 5-year-old daughter or something. She told me that her van had broken down and she pulled off there and called the van company's assistance line and was waiting for help. By this time, my friends had pulled in behind us and a couple of them had come over to see what was up. So apparently, a scary man had driven past her a few times already, the first time pulling over to offer to take her and her daughter to the nearest town for help. She thanked him and said no, and that she was just waiting for the assistance vehicle. He left, but then kept driving past every 10 to 15 minutes in the opposite directions, slowing down and then looking at them and then driving off again. She begged us to stay with her while she waited for the assistance vehicle because this guy apparently terrified her and her daughter too. I agreed, and my friends, being the awesome people that they are, decided that me and my girlfriend were enough, and they just fucking ditched us. Thanks, guys. Anyway, we stayed with the woman for a little while before the car that my girlfriend and I had seen earlier drove past kind of slow, coming in the opposite way that we had seen him the first time. As soon as he had driven around the bend, the lady told us too that was the scary man that she'd been seeing before we got there. This got my girlfriend and I to take her much more seriously after the feeling we got from the guy just seeing him on the road. A few minutes later, he came back from the other direction and pulled into the parking area. Some more context too, I am not an intimidating man. I'm tallish, I'll admit, but I have almost zero muscle and fairly soft features. So there's not at all intimidating me, a terrified foreign woman, her tiny daughter, and my girlfriend, who doesn't look that intimidating but is tough as nails, mind you, parked off a quiet road in a rural location with a not-so-nice-looking dude pulling in where we were. Great, I thought. So he gets out and is redneck as hell and definitely not friendly-looking. No judgment on the redneck part. I come from a poorer country town north of our city and those are my people, but hopefully that sets a picture. Anyway, he strolls over to us, and at this point, I walk towards him to put myself between the girls and him. I have no idea where this bravery came from, and I would definitely not describe myself as a brave person normally. He looks at the girls and then me and asks if he could help. I tell him no, we're just waiting for the assistance vehicle, and tell him that we've got it covered. He then says that maybe he could stay and wait with the woman and her daughter so that we don't have to. I tell him that we're happy to stay and thank him, but again, we've got it covered. He kind of just stood there for a while, staring at all of us too, but not really saying anything and just giving off mega creepy vibes. After what seemed like forever, another car drove past us and looked out but just kept going. And this seemed to startle him, and he mumbled good luck and got in his car and just drove off. We waited with this poor scared woman and her daughter for almost 90 minutes and ended up talking a lot, and hopefully we made her opinions of Australians a little brighter after Mega Creep, who drove past once more about 15 minutes after he'd left us too, mind you. Finally, the assistance vehicle arrived, a bigger dude who could definitely handle himself. I asked to see his ID and stuff to be safe, but he was in a car marked by the company, had all his tools and definitely seemed legit. We gave the lady my number and asked her to text me when she was off safe. She was so grateful to us for staying with her for such a long time, and it made me feel good that even if this dude was just a weirdo-looking awkward country guy that didn't mean any harm and was really just trying to help, we still made her feel more comfortable in a strange country. Mind you, I don't think he was just an innocent bystander, and I definitely believe that he was up to something. But I guess you never know. In the end, I did get a message from her to say that she was safe, so everything ended pretty well. But being up in those mountains where pretty much no one goes and having this weird guy just drive past continuously, almost leering at these girls too, it was a creepy experience, to say the least. In 2007, I was a freshman going on sophomore in college, and my brother, Martin, was still in high school. We have two much younger siblings too, so at the time, they were around elementary school age. My parents decided to take a cruise for their 20th wedding anniversary that year, so my brother and I were voluntold to watch my younger brother and sister, Cole and Charlotte. My brother's best friend, Christian, stayed with us while my parents were gone, and he helped us plan some fun activities with the younger siblings. One idea that they were particularly excited about was a camping trip, as my family had never been particularly outdoorsy in the past. Their eyes lit up at the prospect of cooking our dinner over a campfire and fishing in the stream. Since it was early summertime too, we had the great luck of warm but not too hot weather and a beautiful clear sky for stargazing. Finally packed and ready for the somewhat long drive to the mountains, we checked into our campsite before dark, and Cole and Charlotte helped us to set up the tent. It was strange, but there were no other people at the campground, which was unusual for this time of year. But once we finished dinner, the younger brother and sister were ready for sleep, so Martin, Christian and I just stayed awake a little longer, catching up and getting things ready for the next morning. Suddenly, a white Astro van pulled up in the camping spot directly next to ours. He had dozens to choose from, mind you, but chose to park right next to us. Christian just said, "Oh well, at least we have company now," and he called out a quick hello to the new neighbor with no response back. At this point, I got an uneasy feeling almost immediately, but decided to just push it aside and continued to get the fishing poles ready for the morning and put the food away for the night to ward off bears and wild animals and whatnot. Over the next hour or so, things just started to get weird though. So, the man who parked next to us got out of his van to sit at the picnic table with only a small fire. From our roaring fire, I could see that he was looking directly at us too. However, his fire died out completely several minutes later, and he continued just sitting there. And I could feel him staring, but I couldn't see his face anymore, and he was just sitting there, breathing. Christian and Martin noticed that I was uneasy, and they picked up on how creepy the situation started to become. Martin whispered, "Why is he breathing like that? I don't feel safe anymore." I told Christian and Martin that I was going to stay awake because I just didn't trust this guy. As soon as they moved from the fire into their tents, the man rose from the picnic table and started moving towards us. I called out, "Hello," with no response from him, and finally, in a whim of panic, I demanded that we pack up and just get the fuck home immediately. Christian and Martin got out of their tents and saw the figure of the man just standing there, staring at us, breathing hard. We tried to stay as quiet and as calm as possible while we packed up so as not to alarm Cole and Charlotte. And finally, throwing everything in the trunk, we drove away, not looking back. Before leaving the site itself, though, I asked if we could go to the check-in area at the lodge to see what the hell was going on and see if they knew anything more. I mean, what was this guy's deal, right? But to my surprise, there was no one else registered at the campsite that evening. But the story doesn't end there too. So, about 6 months later, I think, I was in my sophomore year of school when a local hiker went missing in a county just over from where we camped and where I went to college. She was doing something really normal, like hiking with a dog or something, and sadly, she turned up several months later murdered and found in a white Astro van. When the news finally released the photos of the van too and the man's face, I knew immediately that it was him. I got a phone call from both my brother and his friend, and they recognized him too. We came to find out too that this wasn't his first murder because several years later, he became known as the National Forest serial killer. I sincerely mean it when I say that I'm an incredibly cautious camper now because of this encounter. I mean, thinking that it could have been us or my younger siblings, it still gives me nightmares to this day. We recently had a reunion, actually, Christian, Martin and I, and we talked about what happened to us with more than 10 years gone by now. It's amazing that we all remember the details so clearly too. They're just etched in our memories forever now, I think. This is an ongoing situation, but it just went from annoying to seriously creepy. There's a maintenance guy at the office building I work at. He's hired through the landlord of the building or something, not our company. Bob is an older guy, maybe late 50s, and a former heroin addict. I say it like this because we're all pretty sure that Bob still occasionally indulges in the habit. He's a really socially awkward guy, and his mannerisms and way of speaking are just strange. He talks really slow and pauses in places where pauses just don't make sense, or trails off mid-sentence or something, and he always gets super close too when he talks to you and makes intense eye contact or stares at me through our huge front window that happens to be in front of my desk. So, overall, just a mildly creepy guy. So, he's done some really weird things in the past too, like gave me his personal number, bought a coworker a $200 wedding gift and had it delivered to her. I work with all women. The staring of people through windows, and he gave me a toy riding horse thing for my son too, the kind that's on springs that rocks back and forth, and asks me personal questions about my marriage and tried to ask me to go on a date with him at one stage. I also found my car door open and a bunch of my stuff like paperwork and some perfume and makeup that I keep in my center console moved around once when he was here. Today, he comes in the front office and just kind of stands there after saying hi. I ask my coworker if I can go out and have a smoke, and she says yes, and I go get in my car and kept the door cracked so I could smoke. I was parked under a covered carport thing just outside the back door across from the utility and supply room, when all of a sudden, Bob is just standing there and kind of grabs the door and opens it a bit. I don't know where it came from, but I was listening to music, so I wasn't really paying attention. I took my headphones out and looked at him like, what? He doesn't answer right away and then asks if I can take him to the store. A, he has a big white truck that he knows that I know he has. And B, he knows damn well I can't just up and leave while I'm working. I tell him that, and he goes, no, it's okay, I already asked a coworker and she said okay. I ask him why he can't just drive himself, and he sits there for a second and looks at me and then asks me to come help him with something in the utility room. I say no to this, and I need to get back in before I get yelled at. He stared at me for a minute and then smiles the creepiest fucking smile and says, "No, you won't. They think you took me to the store. We have plenty of time." I don't know if I'm accurately conveying the creepy, scary vibe that he was putting off, but I was scared at this point. I didn't know what he wanted or what he was trying to accomplish, but I knew then that it wasn't anything good. And on top of that, he wasn't moving out of my way, and it was like 6 inches away from me. I tell him to move, and he stands there for a few seconds and finally moves. I dialed 911 on my cell and jumped out of the car and just ran inside because I seriously thought that he was going to grab me and push me into the utility room or something. But to be quite honest too, I'm still really shook about it. Oh, and he didn't ask a coworker anything about the store too. He made that whole damn thing up. This guy is creepy as hell, and he left right after that whole thing, and I really don't know what to do about the whole situation. A few years back, I lived in an apartment complex. It wasn't in a bad part of town or anything, and I even lucked out, somehow managing to move into the same building as a handful of friends of mine. I thought it was pretty awesome. So, a couple of months after living there, I noticed things were missing though. It was never anything big like my laptop or Xbox, but my iPad or camera and a couple of other small things just vanished. I knew I'd left them out in the open on the counter, but then they were just gone. A few times, I'd get ready to leave and my bottom lock would be locked too. Now, personally, I don't put much stock into doorknob locks. They've always seemed really flimsy to me and not worth the effort, to be honest, so I only ever used my deadbolt. When people would come over, I'd close the door behind them and automatically lock the deadbolt too. It was just a reflex, even when I was home alone, and the door was locked, but never the knob. I felt even safer using it because the deadbolt had no keyhole on the outside of the door for someone to pick or anything. And 3 times the doorknob was locked when I went to leave the house, and even though I never used it, I rationalized that sure, I probably just did lock it myself. I mean, what else could it be, right? But one day, after living there for about 7 months, I'd say, I'm sitting in my living room and I hear some shuffling by my front door. But since my apartment was a 1-bedroom and fairly small, I could hear it easily. I got up and moved closer, standing maybe 4 feet away from it. My heart sank as I watched my doorknob twist, just ever so slowly. It turned and then the door pushed in and stopped at my deadbolt. At an agonizingly slow pace, the person on the other side pulled it closed and the door just softly clicked, and I watched and listened as they slid a key into my lock and locked the doorknob. I didn't know what to do. I mean, have you ever seen something that just restarts your brain like that? It's so unfathomable that you just can't take in any of the information. That's what this was. I wish I could say that I snuck up to the door and banged against it, scaring the shit out of whoever was on the other side, but I didn't. I didn't do anything because my brain just couldn't actually comprehend that someone with a key was trying to get into my apartment while I was home. The only thing that saved me was my deadbolt. And before anyone says it was a friend or my husband with a spare, no. I had the only 2 copies, or so I thought, of my key because my husband was deployed. Not even family had a spare. But everything snapped into place after that. Someone had definitely been sneaking into my apartment and stealing shit and doing God knows what while I was gone, and then relocking the door behind them, and they've attempted to do it while I was there, too, locking my doorknob. I mean, how many times had they been in my apartment when I wasn't home? But there was no way for me to know because, like I said before, I can't lock the deadbolt from outside. Logically, I knew it had to be someone who worked in the office, a maintenance man most likely, but since I didn't look through the peephole, I couldn't find out which of the 4 guys who worked there it was. About 6 months after moving out, a friend who still lived there told me that all the maintenance men had been fired because all of them were reported creeping around apartments and likely suspected of stealing shit. To this day, I'm still not sure which maintenance man it was that came to my door, but to think that multiple of them were sneaking around apartments, it's creepy. So this story takes place about 2 years ago, I think. I was working graveyard in a small town casino in the cafe on Halloween night. I was dressed up as Hermione because I'm a huge Harry Potter fan and my work has a Halloween contest, so I thought I would put myself out there, which I never do, mind you, and get in on the fun. Now, my outfit was a skirt, short, but I had short leggings on under it, and a polo shirt and a tie, and all Gryffindor themed. I'm on the cashier and it's about 2 a.m. and we don't usually have any customers at this time, but since it's Halloween, we were busier than normal. So I'm just checking people out, just doing my job, actually having a good time seeing everyone dressed up when this guy comes to the counter. I can tell immediately that he's drunk and he was super tall, past 6 feet at least, and really buff and bald. I remember his total was like $2.40, and I don't know why I remember that, but I do, and anyways, he gave me a $100 bill. I told him that I had to get my manager to get change, and he looks at me and goes, "No, this is for you. I'll pay for the coffee separate." Now, as a cashier, we hardly ever get tips, but if someone wants to tip you, they can. But no one has ever tipped me this much before. So I was like, not really sure if he was being serious, and then he looks me up and down and says, "It's for you to come to my room with me." Well, I immediately hand the $100 bill back and say, "No, thank you." He takes out another $100 bill and throws them both at me and goes, "How about now?" I tell him no thank you again, and luckily security was close by and saw what was going on. He came over and nicely asked the guy to just pay for his coffee and leave, and the guy looks at the security guard and says, if she's going to dress like a whore, she should act like one. At this point, I was very close to tears. I've had my fair share of creepy guys in my life, but never like this. Never in my face like this, and the security guy tells him to pay for his coffee and leave immediately or he's going to be escorted out. The guy looks at me and says, "Okay, bitch, I'll wait for you outside. You better meet me outside or else." I'm just standing there, not really sure what to say or do because this guy was just so intimidating. The security guy tells this guy that this is a threat and calls the cops. The security guy tells him that this was a threat and calls the cops, and the guy goes crazy and tries to hit the security guy, but he missed and the security guy puts him by a wall and radios over to someone else to call the cops. So the creep keeps looking over at me saying things like, "Why do all whores act like this? At least I would have paid you," and "dumb bitch," and all that sort of stuff. This all happened so quick and escalated so quickly, and I felt like I barely had time to think, to be honest. At this point, I'm crying and my coworkers take me to the back and the cops come and arrest the guy. I guess he had punched a hole through the wall too and tried to hit one of the cops or something. The cops took my statement and I was allowed to leave early. The same security guy walked me to my car too. I thanked him repeatedly too. Now, the fucked up thing is that apparently this guy was a huge spender at the casino and the casino didn't even press charges or 86 him or anything. And after I heard about that, I quit soon after. Back when I was 14 or 15, I hung around with a sizable group of friends. We would meet up in what we called the field, which basically was a large park in the middle of a residential area which backed onto a cemetery. On one side was an imposing hotel with large grounds, and on the other was a fenced-in wasteland. We hung around towards the back of the field, which was surrounded by trees and bushes, so visibility was pretty much nil from the street. Added to that is that it was very poorly lit, so we would build bonfires at night to provide light and whatnot, and warmth in the winter. During the day, large gangs of us would come and go, and we'd head to the shops or play curbs on the street. A local weirdo would often walk by too, looking back over his shoulder at us every few seconds and immediately averting his gaze if eye contact was made. He would shuffle around the corner, only to reappear at regular intervals. He was just an absolute creep, and this was displayed in his physicality. He was short and of slim build, balding with tufts of long hair creeping down the nape of his neck. As previously described, he would walk in a shuffle motion too, stopping abruptly and turning around to watch us. His eyes darted all over the place too, and he never made direct eye contact. But being teens and with the bravado of safety in numbers, we never really viewed him as a threat though. The lads would roar at him and call him a perv and a pedo and tell him to fuck off, but we gave him little thought otherwise, to be honest. One night though, around November or December, I arranged to meet some friends in the field after dinner. Around this time of year in Ireland, it's pretty much pitch black by 4 p.m, and it was 6:45ish and I was 15 minutes early. The field was dark and empty, but with the fearlessness and naivety of youth, I strolled to our usual spot at the back of the park to wait. Keep in mind that this was around 95 or 96, pre-everyone having a mobile phone. We had a custom little hut in one of the bushes, complete with branches that we used as seats. I settled on one of them and lit a smoke, and all was silent for several minutes until I heard a slight rustling in one of the bushes. I was slightly concerned, but figured that it must have just been a squirrel. The rustling stopped for several moments, but then picked up again, and louder and more vigorous. Definitely not the work of a squirrel. Alarmed, I shot up from my seated position and tried to make out the source of the noise in the dim visibility. Out of nowhere, though, he emerged from the bushes. Pounced would be more accurate, actually, and he was just mere feet away from me. He stared directly at me with the most menacing grin that I've ever witnessed to this day. He put his finger to his lips in a shushing gesture, and I bolted. Through the bushes, branches just whipping against my face. I stumbled at one point too, catching myself before I fell. I ran out of the fucking park in what felt like slow motion at the time, straight to my house about a half a kilometer away. I don't know if he followed me because I didn't look back and I didn't see him again. As I later learned though, he spent several years in a mental facility. Because the next I heard of him, he had apparently murdered his father, beating and eventually stabbing him to death. He was convicted of the murder and detained in a mental facility, and I thought little about him for the 20 or so years since that incident. That is, until a few months back, because there he was, on my bus, gazing around creepily like always. He looked my way, but luckily there was no recognition on his part. At least, I hope not.